Hey guys, tonight we're stepping into the gold-trimmed, scandal-soaked halls of Versailles, where love isn't really love, silk hides daggers, and secrets don't stay secret for long. You're about to witness a story so tangled in politics, lust, and powdered deception that you probably won't survive this. Not emotionally, anyway. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And drop your city and what time it is where you're watching from. I always love seeing how far this little history campfire reaches. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. It begins, as all decadent disasters do, with a beautiful view. You're arriving at the Chateau de Versailles, sprawling like a gilded fever dream under the summer sun. You're instantly struck by how it smells. Roses and sweat, candle wax and stale ambition. Beneath your slippers, marble floors stretch endlessly. Above, ceiling frescoes of gods and battles pretend the chaos down here doesn't exist. Every corridor echoes with the hush of secrets and the clack of 1,000 shoes trying to walk faster than the truth. You're nobody here, just another ruffle in the crowd, but that's perfect. It means you can listen, observe, breathe in the drama without getting poisoned, or at least not publicly. Louis XV is still king, though his golden boy reputation has dulled. Once Louis the Well-Beloved, now he's the monarch of malaise, weighed down by gout, rumours, and a country that's starting to whisper about bread more often than ballet. At 60, he's less interested in running the country and more in personal amusements. You can feel the shift. The court is brittle, nobles cling to favour like drowning men to driftwood. Ministers bicker in low tones, and meanwhile, behind one particularly lavish set of curtains, something new stirs. It's the quiet construction of a little house, not in Versailles proper, but tucked behind hedges, within royal grounds. You might mistake it for a folly or a greenhouse, something harmless and decorative, but no, it's something far more dangerous, the Parc-aux-Cerfs or Deer Park. Of course, the only hunting done here is of the social variety, and the prey, young women, the king's mistresses kept in rotation, out of sight, but not out of mind. You sneak past a pair of servants carrying trays of figs and candied rose petals. Down a side hall you catch sight of a girl, maybe 15, being dressed by attendants. Her eyes are wide, but her mouth is firm. She's about to enter a world where rules don't apply, unless they're invented by the king. You can't help but feel something tight in your throat. Versailles smiles, but it devours. Historically, Louis XV had a parade of lovers, some noble, many not. But what's unusual now is how institutionalised it's become. The king's right-hand man arranges these affairs like hiring court musicians. There's even a woman on salary to prepare the girls. It's deeply creepy and oddly bureaucratic, but none of it causes scandal, not really. That is, until a woman comes along who refuses to stay behind the curtain. Enter Jeanne Bécu. You haven't met her yet, not properly, but you will, soon. For now, just know she's not from here, not from the silk-draped world of Versailles, not from powdered bloodlines or ancient names. She's the illegitimate daughter of a cook raised in a convent, later an apprentice in a wig-shop. She's climbed the Paris social scene with charm, wit, and just enough shamelessness to survive. And now, whether she realises it or not, she's walking straight into the centre of power. You pass a mirror and catch your reflection. Odd how easy it is to forget yourself here. Versailles is like that. It pulls you into roles. The courtiers have theirs, rehearsed and desperate. You find a spot near the Hall of Mirrors, where the king sometimes takes walks in the morning. They say he still stops to admire his own face, and even though the wrinkles are winning. You wonder what he sees. A monarch? A god? Or just a tired man hiding from the weight of empire? In a corner of the salon, a poet recites something about virtue. The irony nearly chokes you. Nearby, a group of ladies fan themselves while casually eviscerating a rival's reputation. She wore last season's lace, one whispers, as if it were a crime against humanity. You smile, but your ears stay open. The real news isn't published, it's whispered. And tonight's whispers are turning toward a certain mistress-to-be. They don't know her name yet. Not really. But they've seen the king's glances, the way his ministers smirk behind their fans. Another one? Someone mutters, as if Pompadour's ghost isn't watching. It's true. Madame de Pompadour, the king's former mistress, wasn't just a lover. She was a political force. She chose ministers, edited plays, ran France in lace sleeves. Her death left a vacuum. And the king? He's trying to fill it with beauty, not brains. You move outside where the gardens stretch like a painting that refuses to end. Fountains sparkle in the fading light. Statues of gods and heroes pretend to be eternal. But the people who walk these paths, they're all replaceable, especially the women. Here's a fun, weird fact for your mental scrapbook. The Parc-aux-Cerfs had code names for its mistresses. Louis didn't refer to them by their real names in documents. He used nicknames like Mademoiselle de Romans or Belle Louise. It's bureaucracy meets brothel, and nobody flinches. Back inside, someone laughs too loud. A court musician plays a lullaby on a viol, and you feel yourself being lulled too, but not to sleep, to awareness. The storm hasn't started yet, but the wind is changing. And Versailles? Versailles always knows before anyone else. Now, one more thing before we drift off for the night. There's still debate, endless in fact, about whether Louis XV was a libertine gone mad or just a king escaping boredom in the only way his world allowed. Was he a predator, product, a man suffocating under a crown too heavy for one person? Scholars still argue, and they probably always will, but what no one argues is this. Jeanne Bécu, soon to be Madame du Barry, will turn this golden kingdom on its lace-trimmed head. You find him just before dusk, in a garden so perfect it almost looks fake. The symmetry is maddening, hedges cut with geometric obsession, gravel paths swept within an inch of their lives, roses bred to bloom in unnatural precision. And in the middle of it all, perched like a ghost of his former grandeur, sits Louis XV, the Sun King's heir, though now more like a candle flickering in a draughty palace. He's older than you expected. His cheeks sag with the weight of years and indulgence. His wig is powdered too heavily, and his eyes, once so alive in portraits, seem to drift toward nothing. He doesn't see you, of course. You're just a shadow in the background, but you see everything. The way he sighs into his wine glass, the way his fingers twitch like they're tired of holding quills and prefer something softer, and the silence around him, thick, expectant, like even the birds have learned not to interrupt. It wasn't always this way. When Louis was young, they adored him. France called him Louis le Bien-Aimé, the well-beloved. He was handsome, gallant, and every inch a fairy tale prince. Women swooned, ministers nodded approvingly, and even Voltaire had kind things to say. He ascended the throne at 5, but ruled in his own right from 1502, and everyone hoped he'd be the second coming of Louis XIV. That didn't exactly pan out. You wander through time as easily as rooms here. Decades slide past. You catch flashes of wars, costly, inconclusive ones. The 7 Years' War gutted France's treasury and reputation. Colonies lost, allies betrayed, enemies emboldened. Louis made bad calls, trusted the wrong people, and every wrong move carved deeper grooves into his once idolised image. By now, France respects him the way you respect a tired uncle at a family reunion, mostly out of habit. And so the king retreats from state matters more and more, preferring the company of women, art, and yes, extravagant bedsheets. Versailles has become a stage for pleasure and evasion. While Paris begins to starve and question, the court dances and powders and laughs at jokes that haven't been funny in 100 years. You can feel it, the disconnect like a crack in stained glass. But Louis isn't alone out here. A man approaches him, tall, powdered, with that distinctive look of someone who spends his days balancing gossip and diplomacy. This is the Duke of Richelieu, one of the king's oldest confidants and a veteran libertine. His face is a roadmap of indulgence. Richelieu leans in and murmurs something about a new diversion. The king doesn't answer, but the twitch in his eyebrow says he's listening. You trail them as they walk slowly down an ivy-covered path. They talk of politics the way one might talk about a broken clock. Regretful, dismissive, but not especially motivated to fix it. What catches your attention, though, is the shift in tone when Richelieu mentions her. She's different, he says, smiling slightly. Not just beautiful, clever, and unpolished. Unpolished is code. It means she's not from the court, not born in silk, not trained from birth to curtsy on command. It means scandal, the kind that smells like roses and burns like fire. Back inside, the palace shifts into evening mode, so candles are lit in ornate chandeliers. Servants glide from room to room with trays of cheese, fruit, and gossip. The music begins, delicate, flirtatious. You slip through a gallery and notice how the portraits seem to watch everything. The eyes of queens and saints, generals and mistresses, all frozen in oil and varnish, all silently judging. A page boy rushes by laughing, dropping a scroll that skitters across the floor. You scoop it up and read the beginning. It's a poem, barely decent, about a girl with hair like fire and lips like sin. Probably about her, the unnamed her. You're starting to sense the whole palace is buzzing about this mystery woman before she even officially arrives. Historically speaking, Louis had been single, in mistress terms, for a while. Madame de Pompadour had died over a decade earlier, and though she remained the emotional centrepiece of his heart, some say even his brain, her death left a vacuum the court didn't know how to fill. Pompadour had been brilliant, a strategist, even after she ceased to be the king's lover. After her came a blur of women. Temporary, transactional, quiet Jeanne Bécu was not going to be quiet. Here's your quirky sidebar of the night. Louis reportedly loved to carve miniature boats, like obsessively. While his country was falling apart, he'd be in his rooms shaving slivers of wood into tiny galleons and frigates. It's a bizarre, almost tragic image. France drifting, and its captain distracted with toys. Some say he did it to calm his nerves. Others think it was his way of controlling something, anything, in a world that no longer respected royal authority the way it used to. You move now through the lesser chambers, where real conversations happen. A lady-in-waiting fans herself and mutters about that shop girl. A valet tightens his jaw and wonders aloud why the king can't be satisfied with a duchess. He needs stability, someone hisses, not perfume and giggles. But already it's too late. The king's curiosity has peaked, and that's all Versailles needs to spiral. There's a tension tonight. Not fear exactly, not yet, but the sense that lines are about to be crossed, that this isn't just another pretty girl, that something in the palace walls is creaking under pressure. You pause near a window and stare out at the gardens again. Perfect, manicured, drowning in moonlight. It's hard to tell if this place is beautiful or grotesque. Maybe both. Maybe that's the point. And still you wonder, what does the king actually want? Companionship? Distraction? Or just to be adored without consequence? Scholars argue endlessly about this. Some say he was a predator with absolute power and zero accountability. Others think he was simply a man suffocating in ritual, aching for warmth in a world where everyone bowed, but no one connected. Either way, his interest in Jeanne isn't going to stay a secret for long. The final glimpse you get tonight is of the king's writing desk. Letters stacked, ink pots glistening, a sketch of a young woman, unfinished but suggestive. He's already imagining her draped in lace, seated beside him, not just a diversion but a declaration. The wheels are turning and Versailles, no matter how much it resists, is about to be rearranged around a girl who was never meant to enter through the front door. You step carefully now, not because the floors are slick with polish, though they are, but because you're entering a space where secrets breathe. The air behind this particular wing of Versailles smells different. It's the scent of roses wilted in their vases, candles burned down too low, velvet that's been touched too many times. You've found the entrance to the Parc-aux-Cerfs, or at least the hallway that leads to it, masked behind the illusion of a service corridor. On paper, it's nothing, a forgotten outbuilding, officially lodging for court staff. But you're not stupid. No one plants lavender hedges and imported Italian fountains for a footman. The Parc-aux-Cerfs isn't exactly public knowledge, but everyone who's anyone knows of it. It's like a half-told joke that makes the whole room uncomfortable. The king's private residence for his less official companions. Girls, mostly young, mostly anonymous, and definitely not born with titles. You walk the path quietly, shoes brushing crushed shell gravel, and realise that this isn't just a house, it's a machine. Discretion built into every plank. Inside, it's all soft light and silence. The rooms are small compared to Versailles, but still beautiful. Gilded mirrors, velvet cushions, porcelain-paved figurines staring out with painted eyes. There are no guards posted, no footmen bustling, only a few maids and a housekeeper who never looks directly at anyone. The atmosphere is strangely peaceful, but the kind of peace you find in a gilded cage. One girl sits near a harp, plucking strings without melody. Another combs her hair and watches herself in the mirror, her expression unreadable. You get the sense they aren't friends. Companionship here is temporary. These girls, fillettes, as the cruelest courtiers whisper, are chosen carefully. Youthful, yes, but also pliable. Some are daughters of minor officials or merchants, hoping to buy favour through silence. Others, like Jeanne Bécu, come from even humbler beginnings, but Jeanne doesn't fit here. Not really. You can already tell she won't be content playing the harp and waiting for an invitation. She's not a side dish. She's planning to rewrite the menu. You find her in the sitting room, balancing a porcelain teacup with deliberate elegance. She's not in silk, not yet, just a well-cut dress that fits like a secret. Her hair is arranged with care, but not extravagance. Her eyes, though, that's what gets you. Wide, intelligent, and not the least bit cowed by her surroundings. She sees the room. She sees you. And you realise this isn't a girl pretending to be royal. This is a woman studying the kingdom before conquering it. Jeanne was born into scandal. Her mother, Anne Bécu, was a cook's assistant who may or may not have been employed at a convent during Jeanne's birth, and may or may not have taken payments for silence. Jeanne's father? Officially unknown, though rumours cling to a monk named Jean-Jacques Gomard. Whether the rumours are true or not, it doesn't matter. Versailles thrives on them. They'll twist her backstory into every version. Tragic orphan, harlot, spawn, divine temptation, depending on who's doing the gossiping. What's undeniable is that she had almost nothing and made it work. She left the convent at 15, worked in a wig shop, caught the attention of nobles' mistresses, and quickly became one of those glittering women who haunt rich salons, always just on the edge of being someone. Jeanne understood early that men had power, but women held influence. And influence in Versailles is everything. Tonight she sips her tea and listens to the housekeeper explain the rules of her new life. No visitors without approval, meals at designated hours, discretion always. She nods, but you can tell she's not registering it as law, just context. There's no fear in her, she's already thinking bigger. You can almost hear the thoughts clicking behind her eyes. Then a knock. The kind of knock that changes everything. The Duke of Richelieu enters, dressed in rich maroon brocade, smelling faintly of cloves and ambition. He doesn't waste time. He bows, compliments Jeanne on her posture, then presents a velvet box. Inside, a simple necklace. Pearls, understated but real. It's the first gesture, the first test. Jeanne accepts it with a thank you so poised it could make a duchess nervous. And you can see Richelieu's eyebrows lift. He knows talent when he sees it. The deal is already made, unofficially. She'll enter the king's orbit, first at dinner, then maybe a hunt, then more private encounters. It's not spoken aloud, but it's understood by everyone. She'll become a mistress, but not one kept hidden. Jeanne's presence is too bright to tuck away in a quiet house forever. Here's your fringe fact for tonight. The Parc-aux-Cerfs wasn't a harem in the Ottoman sense, but it was rumoured to operate like one. At one point, it's said that multiple girls were rotated in and out of the king's favour, their identities so interchangeable to Louis that he sometimes forgot their names and referred to them by number. Gross, yes, but very on brand for a monarch, steadily slipping into existential boredom. You step back into the hallway, and already the wheels are turning. Letters are being drafted, dresses ordered, hairdressers summoned. Jeanne is moving up. The palace won't admit it yet, but it knows, it always knows. There's debate, of course. Scholars today argue whether Jeanne entered the king's life out of pure ambition, clever manipulation, or simple circumstance. Was she an opportunist or a survivor? Was she used, or did she use everyone else better? It's hard to say. What's clear is that she saw the door cracked open, and walked through it like she owned the place. By the time you leave the Parc-aux-Cerfs, it's nearly midnight. The halls of Versailles are quiet now, thick with candle smoke and the ghost of perfumes. A servant nods at you absently, unaware of the tectonic shift happening just down the path. Jeanne Bécu hasn't stepped foot in the palace yet, but her shadow already stretches across its mirrored walls, and tomorrow the game begins in earnest. You don't notice her at first. She blends in too well with the crowd, as if Versailles hasn't decided yet whether to spotlight or swallow her. But then she laughs, low, smooth, utterly out of place in this room full of tight smiles and tighter corsets, and every head turns. Jeanne Bécu has arrived. No longer a shadow in the Parc-aux-Cerfs, no longer a whispered name behind locked doors. Now she's standing under the crystal chandeliers of the Salon de Diane, in a gown that looks like moonlight was stitched into satin, and she's curtsying perfectly, as if she's done it since birth. Only she hasn't. You know that. She's had to learn everything. How to hold a fan, how to walk across marble without looking down, how to smile without revealing too much. She's practiced in front of mirrors for hours, perfecting the tilt of her chin and the cadence of her voice. A team of stylists, tailors, and etiquette tutors have been assigned to her transformation like she's a royal project. And in a way, she is. A living PR stunt for a bored king. The transformation is almost miraculous. This is not the Jeanne of the wig-shop or the backroom salons of Paris. She's now Mademoiselle Vaubernier, a placeholder name until the formalities can catch up with the rumours. She has new teeth, new jewellery, and soon a new title. You watch her glide across the room, her every movement choreographed but still strangely natural, like a wild animal who's learned to dance. This is her first public appearance at court, and it's not an accident. She's been placed carefully, close enough to the king to be noticed, far enough to be deniable. A test balloon. If the nobles hiss too loudly, she can still be whisked back into the park. But if the king's eye lingers, and it does, then the mask will soon come off. She doesn't speak to him yet, not tonight, but their glances touch in midair like sparks. Louis is surrounded by ministers, bishops, and relatives, none of whom dare mention the glowing girl in the silver dress, but everyone feels it. Versailles shifts when the king looks away from them, especially towards someone like her. You listen to the murmurs. The ladies of the court pretend not to look, but their fans flick faster. The men, especially the young ones, smile too much and bow too low. They recognise the danger before the ladies do. Jeanne isn't just beautiful, she's interesting. And worse, she looks like she's enjoying herself. A marquise leans toward her friend and whispers, "She smells like orange blossom. Must be trying to copy Pompadour." The other woman sighs. Please, Pompadour had taste. And that's the thing. Jeanne isn't Madame de Pompadour. She's not educated in Enlightenment philosophy or friends with Voltaire. She's not noble, not refined in that centuries-old inbred way the court prefers, but she's got something they don't. Momentum. Back in the gallery, a few artists and poets watch her with sharp, hungry eyes. They know a new subject when they see one. Jeanne is more than a woman. She's a muse in waiting. Someone's already sketching her profile onto the edge of a wine-stained napkin. A pamphlet writer will be scribbling lines by morning. Versailles doesn't just judge new arrivals, it consumes them. Here's your historical nugget for tonight. When Jeanne made her debut, her origins were so scandalous that she had to be officially married off in a fake legal arrangement to acquire a noble title, thus becoming Comtesse du Barry. Her fake husband, her former lover's brother. The entire process took weeks and was purely ceremonial, like a baptism into sin with state approval. The king needed her at court and the court demanded a title. Problem solved, nobility by paperwork. You drift behind a column and listen as a bishop hisses through his teeth. She can't be allowed to receive communion, he growls, not unless she repents. Another noble scoffs, as if anyone in this room is clean enough to lecture her. They both glance toward Jeanne again, and this time their stares aren't just disgusted. There's fear in them, the kind that creeps in when someone threatens the hierarchy. Jeanne finally speaks, her voice lilting like a song you can't quite place. She compliments a duchess's hair ribbon, then shifts seamlessly into a joke about powdered wigs. People laugh, real laughter. The duchess blushes, and for a second the chill of the room melts. The king notices. You see it in the way he adjusts his sleeve, how his gaze lingers 2 seconds too long. He's not just amused, he's charmed. He sees in Jeanne what Versailles lacks: vitality. She's not jaded, not weighed down by etiquette or intermarriage. She's a breath of fresh, possibly scandalous air. And Louis, worn thin by ceremony, craves anything that feels like life. That night she dines at a side table, not yet invited to the royal table but placed near enough to be seen. She eats slowly, gracefully, avoiding wine, but sipping just enough to blush her cheeks. She doesn't overreach. Not yet. She lets the court come to her. It's a masterclass in seduction, not of the body, but of the room. By midnight her name is on every tongue. Jeanne Bécu, Mademoiselle Vaubernier. That girl in silver, the one with the laugh, the one the king kept looking at. You can practically hear the wagers being made. How long before she's installed in the royal apartments? Will she be gone in a week, or is she here to stay? You pause near a stairwell and glance back at her. She's turning toward you now, smiling slightly, eyes gleaming beneath lashes the size of feathers. And for the briefest moment, boom, you wonder if she sees you. Not just in the room, but in the story. Maybe she does. She's always been good at finding the angles. Of course, scholars today still debate how much of this debut was choreographed by the king's inner circle, and how much Jeanne controlled herself. Was she a pawn, a player, or both? Some argue she was placed there by design, a distraction while real politics moved elsewhere. Others claim she played Versailles like a violin from day one. All you know is this: no one looked away from her all night. And in a palace where memory is short but gossip eternal, that's how dynasties, however brief, are born. It's astonishing how quickly silk can become armour. Just weeks ago, Jeanne was being brushed into wigs in the back of the Parisian salon, balancing her social ambitions against the ever-hovering threat of scandal. Now she wakes up in a bed so massive she could get lost in it, with a canopy embroidered in gold thread and breakfast trays that look like still-life paintings. The transition should be jarring. It's not. She slides into court life like she was born for it, because somewhere deep inside she always believed this was inevitable. And now that belief is starting to catch fire. Her mornings begin with lace and decisions. What shade of pink sends the right message today? Should the hem be scalloped or edged in pearls? Is it too soon to wear a tiara to a hunting luncheon? Everything matters. Versailles runs on detail, and Jeanne is learning to master it. Her dresses are no longer off-the-rack seductions from Paris. Now she has dressmakers who listen closely, nod often, and know their careers hinge on whether she gets a second glance from the king that day. Her favourite fabrics arrive directly from Lyon, the dyes, deep and moody. She doesn't always choose the prettiest gowns. She chooses the ones that make a room shift when she enters. Even her scent is calculated. Florals are too girlish. Musk is too vulgar. So she chooses something unusual. Ambergris and neroli. It's expensive and just a little wild, and it sticks in the memory like a half-forgotten song. By mid-morning, she's already passed 3 duchesses who wrinkle their noses as she walks by, not because she smells bad, because she smells deliberate. Her quarters are expanding too. What began as a borrowed chamber is slowly becoming a full royal suite, repainted in dusky violets and ivory. She commissions tapestries, paintings, a folding screen from China with cranes etched in silver. Her old life, the cramped rooms, the harsh soaps, the dirty coins, has vanished. But she keeps one reminder, a small cracked hand mirror from her mother. It sits hidden in a drawer, taken out only at night when she removes her rouge and stares at the girl beneath the Comtesse. Yes, she's a Comtesse now, Jeanne Bécu, Comtesse du Barry. It's not quite a fairy tale. She had to be married off first to her late patron's brother, in a ceremony so hollow it echoed. But titles don't need sincerity, only paperwork. And with the title comes legitimacy. She can now attend formal events, enter courtly salons, and, most importantly, appear at the king's side without everyone pretending not to notice. The king, meanwhile, is becoming bolder. He walks with her in gardens, not just after dark. He introduces her to favoured painters and asks her opinions on tapestries. She is no longer just a diversion. She is becoming something closer to a partner, a visible gilded ornament, yes, but one he seems to genuinely like. There's even warmth between them, strange as it sounds. She calls him Louis, softly, and he smiles in a way he doesn't for anyone else. You watch this transformation with curiosity and a little disbelief. How did a girl from the gutter seduce a king without saying a word in Latin? Maybe it's that she never tried to impress the court. She never faked education or quoted Voltaire. She simply learned how to make herself unforgettable. Where others bowed, she winked. Where others curtsied, she laughed. And Versailles, for all its arrogance, is starving for authenticity, even if it has to come in a corset. Here's your odd little footnote. Jeanne never got over her love of sweets. Even when dressed in diamonds, she'd sneak candied violets into her sleeve and eat them during council meetings or dances. The palace chefs eventually began preparing secret trays for her. Lavender macarons, sugar-dusted fruits, even honey-roasted chestnuts served in silver bowls. Some ministers mocked it, whispering that France was being run by someone with a sweet tooth. But you'd be surprised how persuasive a woman can be when she knows how to bribe people with sugar and a smile, but not everyone's amused. The court is beginning to turn. The old nobility, the ones with names longer than some family trees, are furious. To them, Jeanne is not a novelty. She's a threat. A reminder that their rank can be eclipsed by beauty, charm, and the king's rapidly shifting whims. They start referring to her in animal terms. La catin, la chienne. They mock her accent, her laugh, her Parisian slang. But Jeanne hears everything and she keeps smiling. Because what they don't understand is that she isn't here to be liked. She's here to stay. You drift through the salons where the whispering gets loudest. Madame Adélaïde, the king's daughter, looks at Jeanne as if she's a stain on a favourite dress. The duchesses pretend not to see her, even as they memorise every detail of her outfit for imitation. You even hear one of the royal guards mutter that the throne's rotten when its footstool wears rouge. The hypocrisy is laughable, really. Half these women had affairs. Most of them clawed their way to titles by way of bedrooms. But Jeanne's sin is visibility. She didn't sneak in. She strutted. And worse, she enjoys it. Scholars still debate how politically savvy Jeanne truly was. Did she understand court manoeuvring? Did she pull strings? Or was she simply a distraction, useful to Louis but ultimately powerless? The records don't agree, but when you see her now hosting private salons, building alliances with ministers, even funding operas and artisans, it's hard not to think, this woman knows exactly what she's doing. At dusk, she stands on her balcony, the wind tugging gently at her skirts. Below, the gardens whisper in the evening light. You imagine the girl she once was, clutching a ragged apron, dodging insults, sticking into the back of Paris theatres. And now here she is, outlined in gold and scandal, daring France to look away. You're walking down one of Versailles' narrower hallways now, the kind that isn't meant for the public, but that somehow carries more traffic than the grand corridors ever do. This is where the real Versailles lives, between the panels and behind the drapes. And tonight, these hallways are humming with a single question. Who is she really? Because Jeanne Bécu may have a title now and a place beside the king, but she's still, to many, a problem wrapped in perfume. The whispers are constant. You pass two ladies in waiting pretending to fix each other's hair while dissecting Jeanne's latest gown. Did you see the embroidery? One says, rolling her eyes. Peacocks, how subtle. Down the corridor a tutor speaks quietly with a priest at door, his voice taut with disdain. It's a spiritual danger, he insists. The king is letting sin into the sanctuary. You don't need to ask who he means. And then there's the bishop. You remember his name, Christophe de Beaumont, Archbishop of Paris, a man who hasn't smiled since Louis XIV died, and probably wouldn't even if heaven itself descended into the chapel. He's a rock in the path of Jeanne's ascent, immovable and loud. The first public clash comes on an otherwise routine Sunday Mass. Jeanne, dressed modestly, well, as modestly as someone with a tiara can manage, enters the royal chapel with grace, prepared to take communion like any good Catholic. Only she doesn't. The priest hesitates, then refuses. There's a hush, heavy and absolute. Not even the page boys blink. Jeanne lowers her eyes, her hands folded neatly. But it's a calculated stillness. She isn't humiliated. She's storing the moment like flint, waiting to strike. Louis hears about it within the hour, and though he doesn't confront the clergy directly, his displeasure ripples through the palace like a dropped wine glass. The court eats it up. She tried to take communion, they gasp, as if she'd tried to burn the altar down with a smirk. A woman like that, how dare she? Never mind that half the congregation cheats on their spouses and poisons rivals with powdered arsenic in their tea. Jeanne's crime is existing where they can see her. That's the real tension here. It isn't just about religion or etiquette, it's about position. Versailles is built on the illusion of divine order, rank passed down through blood, not charm. And Jeanne is a walking glitch in the system. She doesn't belong, not in the pews, not in the portraits, certainly not beside the king. You follow her later that evening to one of her private salons, a space that's grown increasingly popular among the younger nobility. Here, people laugh freely. The rules bend. There's wine, of course, but also a conversation that doesn't sound like it was passed through 3 translators and a mirror. Jeanne listens more than she talks. When she does speak, she's clever, a little wicked, and always watching. She knows who's laughing too loudly, who's pretending to support her while plotting a polite exile. She may be newer to this world, but she's not blind. What's more surprising is who keeps showing up at these gatherings. Minor dukes, obscure artists, even the occasional philosopher. She funds a young playwright whose last production was banned by the censors. She commissions portraits not just of herself but of her ladies-in-waiting, elevating their status. She even adopts a small dog named Zamor, a boy slave gifted to her from the colonies, and dresses him in velvet. It's bizarre, uncomfortable, and absolutely Versailles. Tonight a pamphlet circulates the salons. You see it first near a cluster of giggling girls passed hand to hand like contraband. It's a cartoon, ugly and crude, of Jeanne atop a throne made of wine bottles and powdered wigs, her skirts lifted, the king kneeling at her feet like a lovesick fool. The laughter spreads like a disease. Jeanne is the punchline again. But when it finally reaches her hands, she only tilts her head, studies it calmly, and smiles. "The artist didn't capture my nose quite right," she says dryly, and moves on. You realise something then. Jeanne doesn't fight scandal. She absorbs it, wears it like a fur stole, and keeps walking. Here's your strange fringe fact for tonight. There were rumours that Jeanne employed a mirror room in her private apartments. A space filled entirely with mirrors, walls, ceiling, even furniture, where she could practice expressions, rehearse gestures, and watch herself from every possible angle. It's half fashion myth, half court obsession, and completely believable. Because in a world where image is survival, Jeanne understood that reflection was a weapon. You end up in the king's study as the hour gets late. Louis is alone, scribbling distractedly in a journal no one will ever read, occasionally sighing like the air weighs too much. He's exhausted, not just by court politics, but by the effort it takes to pretend he still enjoys being king. When Jeanne enters, he brightens. Not with lust exactly, with relief. Like she's the only person who isn't asking him for something he doesn't want to give. They speak quietly. You catch fragments, something about a new opera, a remark about a duchess's hideous new hairdo. Then silence. But it's a warm silence. She sits beside him, not touching, just present. And it's enough. Of course, the clergy isn't finished. The Archbishop's defiance sparks a new debate. Should the king really be seen with a woman who can't receive sacraments? Should France's moral compass bend for a mistress? And once again, the pamphlets explode, some in her defence, others dripping with venom. Modern historians remain split on this clash. Was the church sincerely outraged? Or did they simply seize the moment to chip away at a king they already considered too indulgent? The moral posturing seems suspect when you consider how many clerics had their own hidden mistresses and bastard children. But Jeanne became the symbol, the scapegoat, the battle line drawn in powdered chalk. She knows what's happening, and she doesn't flinch, because every rumour, every cartoon, every blocked communion is proof that she's no longer just a scandal. She's a force, and forces, unlike flings, can't be dismissed with a bowed head and a severance dress. It begins with a necklace. Not the famous one, that disaster is still down the road, but something smaller, almost modest by Versailles standards. A string of pink pearls matched with teardrop earrings, presented in a velvet box so soft it practically purrs when opened. Jeanne runs her fingers over it, saying nothing at first, then glances toward the servant delivering it with a raised eyebrow. "No note?" she asks, already knowing the answer. The gift is from Louis, of course. She doesn't need a card, and the king's taste is unmistakable, expensive, sentimental, and just a bit out of date. She wears it the next morning to breakfast, and suddenly half the court is choking on their wine. The colour of the pearls matches the king's sash. A quiet, glittering announcement. She's not just in his favour, she's his. There's no ambiguity left. Duh. No more rumours, no more polite avoidance. This is official. And by lunch, word has already passed through every hallway. The mistress has arrived. Now comes the pageantry. Because Versailles doesn't do subtle. Jeanne's elevation must be accompanied by the proper symbols, jewels, titles, and a retinue of attendants, all slightly ridiculous in their formality. There's even talk of remodelling a section of the palace for her convenience, her own entrance, her own apartments, her own everything. The courtiers pretend to gag, but none of them miss a single step in the parade. They may despise her, but they know how to bow when a new sun rises. The king, meanwhile, can't seem to stop smiling. He walks more lightly, like someone who's taken off a heavy coat. You see it most clearly during their strolls together, her hand resting lightly on his arm, her laugh rising above the fountains. He doesn't just admire her, he needs her. Not just as a lover, but as a distraction, a defence against the creeping cold of his own irrelevance. Because here's what nobody at court wants to admit. Louis is fading. His grip on politics is slackening. His ministers bicker without fear of consequence, and Paris is starting to whisper about the monarchy in a tone that's less reverent, more ironic. But while France frowns, Jeanne beams. Her rise is meteoric, and she's learning how to orbit the throne like a moon sculpted from rouge and daring. Still, there's something about the pearls. They're not extravagant enough, not for what she is now, not for what she's becoming. So, within days, the gifts escalate. A diamond-studded bracelet, a fan painted with mythological scenes where the goddess always has Jeanne's eyes, a carriage in deep green velvet with gold trim and silk curtains that billow even when there's no breeze. She begins to look less like a mistress and more like a queen in exile, and that's when things really start to snap. The aristocracy has a particular flavour of hatred reserved for women like Jeanne. Not noble-born, not trained, not proper. Her presence insults them. She reminds them that status can be purchased, not just inherited, that the king's affection isn't predictable or even logical. It's devastating. You're near the gallery when a countess hisses at her maid, "She'll be in the king's will next, mark my words, and then where will we be?" The answer, of course, is still rich and awful, but the anxiety is real. Jeanne doesn't play by their rules, and worse, she doesn't care that they're offended. She's not seeking their approval, she's collecting influence. That's what really burns. You trail her as she visits her jeweller, one of Paris's finest. He greets her like royalty, not because he has to, but because he knows where his fortune's coming from this year. She requests an inventory of their newest pieces, with the ease of someone selecting grapes. "Something that speaks," she says. The jeweller, to his credit, doesn't ask what it should say. He just opens another drawer, and then comes the coronation. Not literal, of course, but close enough. Jeanne is formally presented to the court. It's a ceremony wrapped in silk and side-eye, a mix of ritual and performance where every bow hides a curse. She's dressed in white and gold, embroidered so heavily she moves like a sculpture. The king watches from the edge, his gaze full of something that might be pride, might be possession, or both. As she walks the long gilded aisle, courtiers shift uncomfortably. They're required to acknowledge her now. Pretending she doesn't exist is no longer an option, and so reluctantly they nod. The deeper the bow, the more insincere. She knows it. She smiles anyway. Tonight's quirky sidebar. Louis XV reportedly had a mistress staircase built, an unmarked stairwell connecting the king's private rooms directly to those of his mistress. No parade, no gossip, just quiet passage. Jeanne's version was said to be velvet-lined. Imagine that, an express route from scandal to sanctuary. Back in her apartments, Jeanne receives visitors. Not many, not the powerful ones, but enough to make the walls echo with conversation. She's hosting now. Hosting, the daughter of a seamstress serving spiced wine to duchesses. She listens politely, speaks just enough, and watches everything. There's strategy in her stillness. Her first real enemy is silence. Her second is flattery. She trusts neither. Scholars debate what power Jeanne really wielded at this point. Was she merely the king's ornament? Or did she hold political sway behind the scenes, quietly influencing appointments, steering gossip, controlling access? There's no single answer. The documents from the time show names rising and falling based on whether or not they curried her favour. That's not decoration, that's control. You'd catch her later by the window, staring out into the dusk, one hand resting gently on the pink pearl necklace, still wearing it, even with diamonds in the next room. Maybe it's nostalgia, maybe it's a reminder of how fast everything changes, or maybe it's a warning to herself. Don't fall in love with the trappings, they can be taken faster than they're given. Because Versailles giveth, and Versailles devoureth. For now, though, she is crowned. Not with a crown, but with presence. The court has acknowledged her, the king has gifted her a name, the people of France are whispering it, and the palace listens when power moves. Even if it wears perfume and walks in heels, you feel it before you hear it, an almost imperceptible stillness that settles over the queen's apartments, like the palace itself is holding its breath. Then there's the sound of silk rustling across polished wood, the muffled rhythm of a dozen careful footsteps. Jeanne Barry is coming, and though no one says it out loud, everyone in the room knows this moment is not supposed to happen. Not here, not in her space. Queen Marie Leszczyńska has been dead inside this palace for years, if not literally. Once the dutiful, devout daughter of a Polish king, she now spends her days in quiet prayer, embroidery, and fading into the brocade. She has long stopped competing for Louis's attention. Instead, she watches the scandals of Versailles float past her, like dust motes in sunlight. Her power faded sometime between child number 10 and mistress number 57, but today something has shifted. Jeanne is not just a scandal anymore, she's a fact. It was Louis's idea, an informal gesture of unity, a short audience, harmless, civil. Jeanne doesn't press for it, she doesn't have to. Now that she's official, it's protocol. The king's mistress must pay her respects to the queen. It's grotesque when you think about it, but that's Versailles. Grotesque in lace, monstrous in manners. The room is a box of frost. You slip into a corner out of view as Jeanne enters. Her gown is soft grey today, trimmed in dove-coloured fur. It's understated, her version of humble. She curtsies deeply, precisely, her head bowed so long you wonder if she's frozen. Marie Leszczyńska doesn't move. Her fingers continue stitching an already flawless handkerchief. A tiny sigh escapes her lips. Not fatigue, disgust. The queen finally looks up, her expression unreadable, and then she speaks. "Madame," she says. "Not Comtesse, not Mademoiselle du Barry, just my Madame. Cold and civil as winter tea. It's enough to draw blood in this world." Jeanne rises slowly, her eyes flicking briefly to the embroidery hoop, then back to the queen. "Your Majesty," she says, her voice smooth as the fur on her cuffs. She says nothing else. She knows better than to speak first, ask questions, or smile. One wrong gesture and she'll be dismissed before she's even curtsied out. The queen says nothing more. She doesn't have to. The silence lasts just long enough to become legend. By the time Jeanne exits, you can feel the tension still buzzing behind her, like static in the heavy curtains. She's been received. Not welcomed, not accepted, but received. It's enough to make it into the court records, and more importantly, into the whispered recollections that pass like contraband between salons. Some versions of the story add spice, that the queen looked at her like she was dirt, that she refused to offer a chair, that she demanded Jeanne be escorted out by the footman who cleans the stables. None of it's verifiable, but then again, in Versailles, truth is always dressed in disguise. You find Jeanne later in her apartments, sipping something sweet and dark, maybe fortified wine, or maybe just candied venom. She's not sulking, she's thinking. The audience was a formality. She knows she'll never win the queen. That's not her war. Her battleground is the court. Still, it stings. You see it in the way she's pulled her hair a little too tight tonight, the way she taps her fingers against the rim of her glass. The queen's rejection doesn't destroy her, but it cements her role. Jeanne is the outsider, the not royal, the mistress. And now she's branded. This is when the backlash begins in earnest. Up until now, the court's hatred of Jeanne has been manageable. Bitter, yes, but not organised. Now it gets teeth. The queen's cold shoulder is interpreted as permission, no, an invitation, to wage war. Suddenly there are snubs at public events, invitations lost in the mail, gloves that don't get kissed, entire orchestras conveniently forgetting to strike up our entry music. And the clergy? They double down. You witness it firsthand. Jeanne enters a private chapel and kneels, only to have the priest rise and walk away before offering the host. No words, just departure. As if her presence desecrates the entire room. Louis is furious, but he doesn't explode. He works behind closed doors, sending sharply worded letters, replacing uncooperative clerics, appointing more agreeable ones. Jeanne, meanwhile, doesn't flinch. She still attends Mass, still kneels, still whispers her prayers. The court calls it mockery. You know it's something else, performance maybe, but also pride. Here's a strange, delightful fact. Jeanne adored pugs. Tiny, snorting, ridiculous creatures with wrinkled faces and the emotional range of a teaspoon. She kept several, each with their own miniature bed, velvet collars and a rotation of snacks. The court mocked her endlessly. She leaned into it, even dressing one in a copy of her hunting outfit. You imagine her watching the rage build and thinking, good. Let them notice. By now the pamphleteers are feasting. You pass a merchant stand outside the palace where cartoons of Jeanne are being sold like candied almonds. One shows her in a nun's habit, lifting it to reveal garters. Another has her sitting on the king's throne while Louis polishes her boots. Even peasants in the outer towns know her name. Some with envy, some with fury. You hear a noble mutter, a mistress with the nerve to pray. That's the problem, really. She doesn't behave like they expect, she doesn't grovel, she doesn't beg. She lives like she belongs, and that, more than her jewels, more than her accent, is the unforgivable sin. Of course, scholars still debate the Queen's role in all this. Was Marie Leschinska truly offended, or just playing the only card left to her in a life where she'd been sidelined for decades? Some argue she was just keeping up appearances. Others think her disdain was sincere, a devout woman unable to stomach the woman who replaced her in the king's affections. But the truth? You suspect it's both. The Queen's silence was a verdict. And in a court that lives on appearances, Jeanne will forever be the woman who bowed and was met with a needle and thread. Still, the palace hasn't seen the last of her, because one curtsy may earn you a scar. But Jeanne knows something better than revenge. She knows how to look good under pressure. And she's only just beginning to shine. Versailles is all noise and shine in the daylight. But when the candles flicker low and the silk rustles soft as whispers, you begin to hear the real heart of the palace, throbbing with secret sins and the gentle hum of hypocrisy. Tonight, it pulses with one conversation, echoing down the corridors like distant thunder. The Comtesse du Barry has been denied communion again, publicly, bluntly, by name. And this time the priest doesn't just walk away in silence, he makes a statement. An actual sermon, trembling with self-righteous fury, declaring that no woman living in sin with the king can approach the altar of God. That to serve her the Eucharist would be to mock the sacred. The air in the chapel still smells of incense and judgment. Jeanne is not in the chapel when it happens. She hears about it second-hand through a chain of polite gasps and half-truths delivered with curtsies. By evening, the entire court knows. And Versailles? Versailles is delighted. Not because they're particularly pious. Half of them think confession is just where you go to nap. But because public humiliation is sport here. And today, they have a new favourite target. What do you do when the church won't have you, and the Queen won't speak to you, and the nobility sneers as you pass? You buy another dress. Not just any dress, of course. This one is a defiant masterpiece, crimson silk slit high at the sides, embroidered with gold flames licking upward from the hem. The court will say it's vulgar. The bishop will say it's blasphemous. Jeanne wears it like a banner. She doesn't need a pulpit. Her sermons are stitched into fabric. The morning after the sermon, she attends Mass again. Of course she does. Same pew, same posture, same unshaken calm. She kneels, she bows her head, she closes her eyes as the priest walks past her. There's no confrontation, no words, just absence. Her hands remain clasped, but her back never slumps, not once. The clergy aren't sure what to do with that. Louis, meanwhile, is beyond furious, but he doesn't scream or stamp his feet. He convenes a meeting, private, swift, and composed of exactly 3 people. Himself, his confessor, and a representative from the Archbishop's office. You listen in, unseen behind a velvet screen. The king's voice is quiet, but his tone cuts like chilled steel. This palace runs on order, he says, not vengeance. The church naturally refuses to budge, and so, in classic Louis fashion, he shifts tactics. He doesn't force the bishop to yield, he simply moves Jeanne's spiritual affairs into friendlier hands. A more accommodating priest, a different chapel, one less visible but just as valid. The communion might be private, but it happens. Jeanne receives the body of Christ behind closed doors, with quiet dignity and a pearl rosary wound around her wrist. Here's a strange little wrinkle in the records. Jeanne reportedly had a confessor who was also a gambler. Not in any official capacity, of course, but he once lost 3 horses in a card game. Gossip claimed Jeanne kept him around not for his piety, but because he offered shorter penances and better conversation. Whether it's true or not, it perfectly fits the absurd logic of Versailles, where forgiveness can be folded neatly into the next card shuffle. You return to her apartments that evening, where she's hosting yet another quiet salon, this time themed around virtue and vice. She's reading aloud from a passage of Rousseau, ironic considering how much Rousseau would have loathed her. Her guests listen politely, sipping liqueurs and pretending they understand what she's talking about. They're not here for philosophy. They're here for her. Jeanne in crimson is impossible to look away from. She pauses mid-reading and glances toward you, or someone beside you, and smiles. "Tell me," she says lazily, "do you believe virtue is what you are, or what people say you are?" A few people chuckle. One count raises his eyebrows, but no one answers. That's the trick of her salons. They're not about discussion. They're about display. But when everyone leaves, when the room is quiet, you catch a different glimpse. Jeanne sits before her vanity, not admiring herself, but just still. Her eyes find her reflection and don't blink. You sense the fatigue behind her carefully painted face, the relentless effort it takes to be both spectacle and survivor. Outside, the whispers don't stop. The pamphlets are especially vicious this week. One depicts her holding a crucifix in one hand and a glass of wine in the other, with the words, "Redemption à la mode." Another claims she's bribed the Pope for forgiveness. Some call for her to be exiled. Others suggest more final solutions. The French mob may be distant for now, but their laughter is getting sharper. Historians still argue over this period of her life. Was Jeanne sincerely religious? Was she attempting to redeem herself in the eyes of God, or just outmaneuver the moralists? Some say her persistence in attending Mass shows faith. Others call it vanity wrapped in lace. The truth is probably a tangle of both, but this much is certain: she never stops showing up. Every Sunday, every holy day, even during Lent when others vanish behind excuses and garden parties, Jeanne is there. Not welcome, not silent, simply present. She becomes a strange icon in her own right. Not a saint, never that, but something more unsettling. A sinner who won't apologise. Even Louis finds it confusing. One night he murmurs to her, "Why do you keep going?" He's half asleep, his head resting on her lap, eyes fluttering closed. She strokes his powdered hair and says simply, "Because they want me to stop." He chuckles. "That's reason enough." It's the best reason. And you believe her. You believe that she goes not to be saved, but to stay standing. Not to be pure, but to be seen. Not to ask forgiveness from those who would never grant it, but to remind them that she does not need it. Somewhere behind a tapestry, someone is painting. The smell of linseed oil and crushed pigment clings to the corridor, faint but distinct. A trace of something creative lurking in this otherwise frozen world. Jeanne du Barry has commissioned another portrait. Not because she's vain, though vanity plays its part, but because portraits are power. Immortalization by brushstroke. Every glance, every ringlet, every embroidered cuff captured not just for now, but for history. A declaration. I was here, and you can't pretend otherwise. You duck into the studio and watch. The painter, a rising talent named Drouet, stands back from the canvas, squinting. Jeanne sits still, her head tilted just slightly to the left. Her gown is pale blue today, the colour of storm-washed sky trimmed in silver. Her face is relaxed, poised, but her eyes, they flick to the mirror more often than to the artist. She's not checking for flaws, she's checking for control. The king wants the portrait to hang in his private gallery beside the late Madame de Pompadour. A subtle message, or maybe not so subtle. My heart has moved on. This is Versailles, after all. Everything means something. Every placement is a political earthquake disguised as interior decor. You can almost hear the fury building across the palace. Pompadour still casts a long shadow. She was not just a mistress, but a minister in pearls. She advised on foreign policy, literature, even architecture. Jeanne is no Pompadour, they say. She doesn't read Voltaire aloud during dinner or fund Enlightenment encyclopedias. She giggles, she flirts, she plays with dogs, she's frivolous. But maybe frivolity is more dangerous. Pompadour used intellect to sway the court. Jeanne, she uses joy. She glides through salons with a laugh that makes people lean in. She throws masked balls where philosophy books are banned and wine flows like divine revelation. She knows exactly what she's doing. She's giving the nobility what they crave, distraction. And distraction, when wielded properly, can become domination. You find yourself at one of these masked balls, a vision of excess, held in the smaller ballroom of Versailles. The chandelier has been doubled in size for the occasion. Everyone's in costume, from shepherds to gods, though no one dares dress as royalty except the actual royals. Jeanne enters late, wearing a black domino mask and a gown so glittering it looks like the Milky Way got tipsy and collapsed onto her shoulders. People stop dancing. They part like a red sea of powdered wigs. She doesn't speak at first. She moves through the crowd like she owns it. Her fan flicks open and closed with military precision. She touches no one, but everyone feels touched. The king arrives minutes later, masked too, though nobody is fooled. He doesn't even try to act casual. He finds her hand, kisses it, and then steps back so she can be seen. Let's take a pause here for your odd fact of the night. Jeanne adored puppets. Yes, actual marionettes. She funded puppet theatres and once hosted a shadow play where the courtiers' real lives were acted out, thinly veiled, absurdly dramatic. Nobody knew whether to laugh or strangle. Somewhere around midnight, a whisper starts to spread. There's a new guest, someone not on the list. You follow the tension through the room, and there she is, Louise Marie de Bourbon, an illegitimate daughter of Louis XIV, old and sharp-tongued, staring Jeanne down like a cat sizing up a bird. She doesn't curtsy. She doesn't speak. She simply stands there until the king notices and awkwardly nods her way. Jeanne doesn't falter. She steps forward, extends her hand and says, "Madame, your mask is exquisite." It's an olive branch dipped in acid. The court nearly faints. That's the trick of these social battlegrounds. The weapons are smiles and silk, but the wounds are real. Jeanne's never going to win these people over. But she doesn't have to. She just has to keep them off balance. And they are off balance. Her portrait is unveiled the next week. Rosy cheeks, gentle eyes, hair powdered to cloud-like perfection. It is soft power, made visible. The king displays it prominently. Visitors stop and stare. Some pretend not to see it. Others can't stop staring. A few claim it doesn't look like her, that it's too flattering, that it's political propaganda disguised as pretty. Of course it is, that's the point. Jeanne smiles through it all, but you sense her guard rising. She's winning the image war, but at what cost? Her enemies grow sharper, her support is shallow. Even Louis's daughters, Madame Victoire, Madame Sophie, refer to her as la fille, the girl, with barely concealed contempt. The royal family tolerates her, but no more than that. Yet she keeps rising. She invests in charities, opens an orphanage, funds artists and composers. All move straight out of Pompadour's playbook, but with her own twist, less enlightenment, more glitter. Still, the people start to take notice. Not everyone hates her, not the ones receiving her coin. Modern historians can't agree on whether this phase of Jeanne's life was strategic or instinctive. Was she trying to prove herself worthy of court? Or was she simply enjoying the privileges while they lasted? Some biographers claim she was coached, taught how to spend her favour. Others insist she was playing chess alone in a room full of checkers. You end the day watching her portrait being gently covered for the night, the room dimmed, the silk draped across her painted face like a royal shroud. And you wonder what she's thinking upstairs, in her rooms, maybe feeding one of her spoiled little pugs, maybe rereading a letter from her tailor. Maybe, just maybe, she's staring into her mirror, wondering if the version of her in that frame will outlast the one behind the glass. Because portraits don't blink, they don't age, they don't fall out of favour. And Versailles, it only remembers what it can hang on a wall. The morning smells like roses and blood, which is typical for Versailles on days like this. Someone's honour has been insulted, publicly, flamboyantly and irreparably, and so naturally someone else has responded with swords. It's not the first time a duel has erupted over Jeanne de Barry, and it won't be the last. You arrive at the edge of the palace garden just in time to see two men lunging at each other, like overdressed wasps, their wigs tied back, faces taut with rage and pride. Their seconds stand nearby, expressionless and bored. It's all so familiar, they might as well be refereeing a tennis match. The cause of today's spectacle? A comment. A careless insult mumbled over the wine at a card table last night. The Comtesse may be good at playing Mistress, but she'll never play Queen. The wrong man heard it. A friend of Jeanne's, or maybe a client of her charm. Lines were drawn, gloves thrown, and now, in the delicate early sunlight, two grown men are trying to stab each other over a woman who isn't even watching. Jeanne's asleep during most of it, or pretending to be. When she's told what happened, she doesn't blink, just stretches, yawns softly, and asks whether either of them died. No? Then bring her chocolate, thick with cinnamon, and maybe a spoonful of scandal to stir in. The court buzzes over the duel all day, not because it's rare, Versailles eats drama for breakfast, but because it confirms something they all dread. Jeanne has influence. She inspires devotion that draws blood. That's not supposed to happen outside of marriage, and certainly not with a woman whose name they still say through clenched teeth. The duelist who defended her ends up with a shoulder wound, a ripped cuff, and a week of fame. Jeanne sends him a violet-scented note and a ribbon from her gown. He keeps it in his waistcoat until the day he dies. No one ever remembers what the other man said, only that someone got stabbed for saying it. You wander the palace that evening, and the story shifts depending on who tells it. Some say it was over a love letter. Others insist one of the men called Jeanne Pompadour's ghost in a low-cut gown. The variations don't matter. The myth is what sticks. The woman's so powerful she could ruin reputations without lifting a finger. It's romantic, it's terrifying, and it's exactly the story Versailles wants to tell itself. But the real Jeanne? She's upstairs, holding court in her chambers, casually brushing a small dog while listening to a playwright recite an unfinished verse. Her rooms smell like bergamot and old wood. The walls are lined with silks in pale green and ivory, and her windows are cracked open just enough to let in the scent of distant honeysuckle and bruised egos. One of her ladies-in-waiting leans in and whispers something about the duel. Jeanne doesn't react immediately. Then, in a voice just loud enough to be overheard, she says, "Tell the Comte d'F next time aim higher." Everyone laughs, even the ones who weren't supposed to. It's here, in these little moments, that you see what makes Jeanne dangerous. Not just the king's favour, not just her looks or laughter or glittering gowns. It's the way she bends perception. She makes everyone feel like they're in on the joke, even when they're the punchline. She weaponizes charm and no one notices the blade until it's already kissed their ribs. And oh, how the nobility hate her for it. One marquis goes so far as to publish an anonymous pamphlet claiming she seduced her way into court using, pagan oils and illegal astrologers. Which is hilarious, considering how many of those same oils line his wife's dressing table. The palace guards confiscate the copies, but not before dozens have already been read aloud at salons, laughed at, and quietly believed. Here's your fringe fact of the night. Jeanne reportedly had her palm read by a mysterious Italian visitor who predicted that she would die beneath a blade. She laughed and tipped him generously. Superstition was fashionable after all, but you have to wonder if a tiny shiver crept down her spine. Even Louis is affected by the duel. That evening he sits unusually quiet, his wine untouched. Jeanne notices and leans toward him, her voice gentle. "Was it the fight?" she asks. He nods. "People bleed so easily for you." She smiles, but there's a flicker in her eyes. They'd bleed just as easily to see me fall. And she's right. The tide of opinion is always shifting, especially in a place where loyalty is measured in compliments and alliances expire faster than perfume. Her place is secure, for now, but everyone is waiting for the moment the king grows bored, for the next young thing to catch his eye, for Jeanne to make one mistake too many. She knows it. That's why she doesn't just rest on charm, she invests. In art, in patronage, in connections. She hosts events that even her enemies attend. She sends little gifts, just enough to confuse them. She keeps the court off balance, unpredictable. The worst thing Versailles can say about someone is that they're too familiar. Jeanne is never that. Modern scholars argue over what Jeanne really wanted. Did she crave power, protection, permanence? Was the dueling and devotion a byproduct of her presence, or her plan all along? Some biographers treat her like a master manipulator. Others think she simply adapted faster than anyone expected. What's clear is this: she understood spectacle, and Versailles ultimately is a theatre. You leave the hall as music rises from somewhere below, a harpsichord, faint laughter, the rustle of skirts. A courtier passes you, his sleeve bloodied and his lips smirking. You recognise him as one of the duel's witnesses. "Honour," he says with a shrug, "is just perfume on ego." But even he knows the truth. No one duels for a mistress unless they believe she's already more than that. Versailles has seen its share of rivalries. Sister against sister, minister against marquise, noble against chambermaid with suspiciously expensive shoes, but few feuds are quite as icy, elegant, and inevitable as the one unfolding now. Jeanne du Barry versus the Dauphine, or as she's better known to modern ears, Marie Antoinette. The Dauphine arrives at Versailles like a gust of alpine air, all bright cheeks and German precision. Barely a teenager, shipped in from Austria with an overstuffed trousseau and a head full of awkward French, she's intended as a balm for France's soul and a womb for its next king. Everyone watches her with adoration, then with fascination, then slowly with skepticism, but that's later. Tonight, she steps into the palace with all the poise of someone who's been told since birth that she's both divine and fashionable. Jeanne is waiting, not with malice, not even with envy, but with the kind of smile one wears when meeting the woman destined to outlast her. Because that's what the Dauphine represents, the future. Jeanne knows she is very much the present, and in Versailles, the present has a way of turning to memory at the speed of a changing fashion season. Their first meeting is not dramatic on the surface. A salon, a string quartet humming in the background, polished floors so reflective they double the size of the room. Jeanne wears violet silk. Marie Antoinette is in pale yellow, looking more like spun sugar than royalty. The introductions are made. The Dauphine bows her head and says nothing. Nothing. Not Madame, not Comtesse, not even the obligatory nod that would have cost her nothing but a few seconds of superiority. The silence stretches so long it becomes performance. Jeanne curtsies anyway, deep, flawless, controlled. You can feel the chill slither across the parquet. The court sees everything. Of course it does. The omission is noted, repeated, dissected and applauded. The nobles are thrilled. They hate Jeanne, and now the Dauphine has given their hatred a crown. It's etiquette warfare, and Marie Antoinette just fired the first cannon with a polite blink. Jeanne doesn't show her anger, at least not in public, but she knows, and she remembers. That's her trick. She turns slights into fuel. Her salons get livelier, her gowns more outrageous. She starts favouring the same colour palettes the Dauphine wears, just slightly brighter. One week, Marie Antoinette wears forget-me-not blue. The next, Jeanne appears at dinner in sapphire. It's subtle, ridiculous, and utterly calculated. The Dauphine retaliates the only way she knows how. She ignores her. For months. At every court function, every dinner, every royal procession, she acts as though Jeanne is invisible. She speaks to Louis with the studied distance of a girl forced to live in a room with a pet she didn't ask for. The king notices, of course, but he says nothing. Perhaps he thinks it will pass. Perhaps he underestimates just how much pride his little Austrian bride has been trained to carry. Jeanne starts calling her La Petite Reine, behind closed doors. The little queen, not cruel, just dismissive. Her tone is airy, but you can hear the edge, because Jeanne, no matter how high she climbs, will never be a queen. And Marie Antoinette, she was born to be one, even if she stumbles. Here's your curious aside. Marie Antoinette reportedly once refused to share a carriage with Jeanne, saying, "I do not wish to ride with that woman." She said it in French, of course, but with an Austrian accent so thick the Chamberlain had to ask her to repeat herself. She did slowly, and Jeanne heard it from a lady-in-waiting by evening. The standoff begins to seep into everything. Seating arrangements at concerts become political puzzles. Ball invitations are timed to avoid overlap. When Jeanne throws a masquerade, the Dauphine throws a dinner. When the Dauphine commissions a harpist, Jeanne hires an entire opera company. It's not just petty, it's survival. And the court picks sides. Older nobles, those with connections to the king, stay opposés to Jeanne. The younger generation gravitates toward the Dauphine. She's their age, their style. She drinks champagne, she laughs too loudly, she gambles like it's a virtue. She doesn't know how to speak to bishops, and that's exactly what they love about her. Jeanne watches it happen, and for the first time in years feels something foreign, irrelevance, not quite yet, but creeping closer. She finds herself pausing in front of mirrors a little longer, reapplying rouge more carefully, laughing harder at jokes she's heard before. When the king forgets the name of poet she introduced him to, she spends the entire night trying to bring it back up. It doesn't work. Still, she refuses to fade. She doubles her patronage, funds new tailors, becomes the unspoken benefactress of half the Parisian theatre scene. She starts inviting foreign diplomats to her dinners, seating them just close enough to Louis to make a point. If the Dauphine has youth, Jeanne will have a reach. Historians love this era because it's so perfectly theatrical. Two women, one mistress, one queen-to-be, orbiting the same sun while refusing to share the same sky. Was it personal, political, a reflection of a fading monarchy torn between tradition and indulgence? Everyone has a theory, but the simple truth might just be this. Versailles cannot tolerate two women with that much light. And you begin to wonder which of them understands the game better. Marie Antoinette still clinging to her moral superiority like a fan she doesn't know how to close? Or Jeanne, who's lived in a world where morality is optional but spectacle is survival? You find Jeanne on the terrace at twilight, her gown rustling like wind-tossed leaves. She's sipping from a porcelain cup and watching the gardens with that half-smile she saves for when she's quietly furious. "Did you hear?" she says to no one in particular. "The dauphine has taken up the harp?" You nod. Jeanne sips again, then adds, "Perhaps I'll take up the violin. I've always loved the sound of strings being pulled too tight." Versailles may be a palace, but it functions more like a theatre. Each day a rehearsal, each night a performance, each hallway a backstage where alliances are sewn into seams, and backstabbing is just part of the choreography. Jeanne du Barry knows this better than anyone. So when the whispers begin about her being just a pretty face, she doesn't respond with speeches or confrontations. No, she does something much more effective. She starts funding artists, not just painters and portraitists, though there are plenty of those. She begins with them, naturally, selecting only the most talented and the most talkative. The kind who will paint her flatteringly, of course, but also tell their influential clients how charming, how generous, how unexpectedly intelligent the Comtesse du Barry is. She even helps arrange commissions for them from other nobles, ensuring they owe her and talk about her. But she doesn't stop there. Next come the musicians, court composers, flutists, entire ensembles who had been scraping together performances in drafty salons, now find themselves invited to her apartments for supper and chamber music. She pays them well, and more importantly, she listens. Not with polite nods, but with real interest. It startles them, it flatters them. They leave with full purses and fuller egos, and tell everyone they meet how sophisticated she is. Then come the playwrights, the dramatists, the pamphleteers, yes, even them. Jeanne knows how power works in Versailles, but she's also beginning to understand how image works in Paris. If the court won't love her, perhaps the public will, so she throws subtle support behind a few scribblers with flair and sharp pens. Writers who had previously ridiculed her now receive quiet invitations to close performances, or a surprise purse of louis d'or delivered with no sender's name but an obvious implication. Some say she's buying praise, others say she's building a reputation. The truth, of course, is both. In 1 month, her name goes from scandalous to fascinating. Parisians start asking who she really is. Artists defend her in salons. She understands beauty, one poet claims, sipping wine like it's a podium. She's not a pompadour, perhaps, but she is current. That word becomes her shield. Current. And here's the quirky, delicious detail of the night. Jeanne once funded a puppet theatre. Again. Only this one was for children of the palace staff. Weekly performances of fairy tales and Greek myths performed in a side hall, attended by governesses, nurses, and occasionally the king himself. The story goes that one of the puppets, meant to be Ulysses, was dressed suspiciously like a certain bishop. Nobody acknowledged it. Everyone laughed. Her flair for self-promotion begins to morph into something bigger. Influence. People who once wouldn't dare be seen with her now ask to have dinner in her salon. A duchess asks her to recommend a painter. A general sends her a miniature portrait of himself, unsigned but unmistakably suggestive. She places it on a mantel, without comment. Even the dauphine notices. Marie Antoinette, with her delicate features and increasingly frayed nerves, begins hearing praise for Jeanne from quarters she thought loyal. The Comtesse has good taste, someone says during a music rehearsal. Another compliments a set of tapestries in Jeanne's rooms. Marie's silence sharpens by the day. The rivalry doesn't explode, not yet, but it smoulders hotter now. Jeanne has discovered a kind of power that even royalty must respect. Cultural clout. She becomes the tastemaker of the moment. Her choice of colours, especially lavender, sweeps through Paris. Her hairstyle, taller, powdered, more softly, becomes the talk of the quarter. Even her dogs become fashion statements. She names one Mimi and another Philosophe, the latter a sly jab at the Enlightenment crowd who still don't know whether to mock her or be grateful for the funding. Meanwhile, back at court, Jeanne begins decorating her apartments like a gallery. Not with ostentatious clutter, but with curated works, intimate portraits, dreamy landscapes, small sculptures that feel like secrets. Her drawing room becomes the unofficial salon for conversation. Artists speak more freely there than anywhere else in Versailles, though they still keep their flattery ready at the tip of the tongue. One evening, a young violinist plays a haunting melody in her chambers. As the notes rise and fall, Jeanne watches her guests' faces more than she listens. She's measuring reactions, taking mental notes. Who closes their eyes, who pretends to understand, who asks to speak with the musician afterward. Influence isn't just who listens to you, it's knowing who listens to whom. And the king, he adores it. He's never looked more relaxed. Surrounded by beauty, warmed by admiration, flattered. By culture he pretends to understand. Jeanne makes him feel like the centre of a tasteful universe. He believes he is sponsoring art. She lets him believe it. But make no mistake, this is her gallery. Of course, not everyone is fooled. A few ministers begin to grow suspicious. She's building a faction, one warns, with music and wine. The accusation sounds absurd when said aloud, but it's not wrong. Jeanne is collecting people the way others collect titles. Historians now debate whether this was political genius or accidental charisma. Did Jeanne have a long-term plan, or did she simply realise that culture offers the kind of leverage titles cannot? Some say she understood Versailles better than any noble, that it was not ruled by blood but by narrative. You see her one afternoon walking along the orangery with a painter beside her, both of them laughing. Her hair is less styled today, her sleeves rolled slightly for the heat, and in that moment she looks less like a courtesan and more like a queen of her own making. "I want a new portrait," she tells him. "Something less lovely, something real." The painter blinks. "Real, madame?" "Yes, with shadows. Let them say I look tired. Let them see I'm still here." You watch as he nods, inspired and terrified. She walks on. She isn't just painting herself into the record. She's creating a version of herself that Versailles will be forced to remember. Not because they loved her, but because they couldn't escape her reflection. It's a warm afternoon, and the gossip moves faster than the breeze. You feel it before you see it. The sudden shift in posture as courtiers glance over their shoulders, lean in a little too close to whisper, and pretend they're not reading a folded piece of paper for the third time. It's not an invitation. It's not a royal decree. It's something altogether more delicious and more dangerous. It's engraved, not with words, but with bodies. Engraved like a naughty secret on fine parchment, smuggled through courtyards, tucked into sleeves, passed hand to hand like a forbidden dessert. You catch a glimpse of one as it flutters from a gloved hand. A woman in a powdered wig and a barely-there corset sprawled across a velvet settee, her legs curled suggestively, her mouth forming a perfect O. And beside her, a caricature of the king, recognisable by his long nose and sagging eyes, pulling back a curtain with cartoonish delight. The caption reads, "La nouvelle messe," the new mass. It's not subtle, it's not elegant, and it's everywhere. Someone's been printing erotic engravings of Jeanne Bécu. Dozens of them, maybe hundreds, each more obscene than the last, each featuring imaginative reenactments of her supposed nightly antics. In one, she's riding the king like a carousel horse. In another, she's reclining in a bubble bath made entirely of golden coins, attended by priests with their eyes covered and their mouths hanging open. The court howls with laughter. Publicly, they tisk and gasp and fan themselves like Victorian ghosts. Privately, they keep the prints under their mattresses. Jeanne finds out almost immediately. She doesn't need to be told. She sees one fluttering from a valet's coat as he bows too deeply. Her lips purse. Not in horror, not even in anger, just mild annoyance, the way you might react to someone stepping on your hem. She's been drawn, printed, scandalised and duplicated like wallpaper. The mistake is assuming she didn't expect this. She did. What surprises her is how creative people have become. One of the prints shows her with angel wings and horns, both. Another has her blessing kneeling courtiers with a riding crop. Jeanne actually laughs at that one. She keeps it. The king is livid. Not because he's embarrassed. Louis XV hasn't been capable of shame since the War of Austrian Succession. But because someone's attacking his taste, his judgment, his property, in a sense. He orders an investigation. Several printers are arrested. A few broadsheets are burned, but it's too late. Once the images are out, they're everywhere. You can't unsee Jeanne lounging nude on the throne with a powdered wig covering only her modesty. Some suspect the Dauphine's allies. Others think it's the clergy retaliating in ink. One wag suggests it's an artist Jeanne didn't commission. A jealous former lover. A rejected poet. Versailles is a breeding ground for creative spite. You hear the engravings discussed in code. "Have you seen the new portraits?" a duke asks, eyes twinkling. "She looks so expressive." A lady responds, "I thought the shading was very true to life." Their laughter sounds like silver bells dipped in venom. Jeanne doesn't try to stop the prince herself. She knows better. Fighting scandal in Versailles is like fighting fog. You'll only look ridiculous and still end up soaked. So instead, she pivots. She begins hosting more visible, respectable events, evenings of music and poetry, charity auctions, garden walks with young girls in modest gowns. Her salons begin featuring discussions about art theory and religious symbolism. She invites priests. She praises morality, just loudly enough. She's not erasing the images. She's diluting them. It's strategy, not panic. She even leans into the performance. Her gowns become more romantic, less daring, but with small, sharp details. One dinner she wears a corsage of lilies, fastened with a pin shaped like a devil's tail. A wink to those watching closely. She's not pretending to be innocent. She's reminding them she's in on the joke. And here's your fringe fact of the night. During this scandal, a street artist in Paris reportedly made a puppet show reenacting the daily life of Madame du Barry. With puppets of the king, Jeanne, and a chorus of disapproving priests, the authorities shut it down after 2 performances. The puppets mysteriously vanished. Some say Jeanne had them stolen and kept them in a box under her bed. A souvenir. The public, of course, laps it up. Outside the court walls, Jeanne becomes something new. Part symbol, part celebrity. To the lower classes, she's a woman who clawed her way into power with beauty and wit. To the radicals, she's a symptom of royal decay, a mistress in the machine. Either way, she's famous. The engravings, crude as they are, make her immortal in a way even portraits can't. And Jeanne, being Jeanne, understands the weird little power of being infamous. If they're going to draw her naked, she might as well make sure they get a good side. She begins requesting new portraits, not for Versailles, but for the public. Commissioned likenesses circulated quietly to booksellers and printers. Soft, flattering, pious even. A subtle campaign of self-repair. She even donates one to a convent in need of fundraising. The abbess thanks her in writing, privately, of course. And still the court bristles. They expected her to crumble, to beg to disappear in shame. Instead, she glows brighter. Rumours swirl that she's influencing court appointments again, that Louis won't make a decision without her approval, that foreign diplomats are requesting audiences with her. Was she complicit in the engravings? Did she plant them to stir sympathy, boost visibility? It sounds wild, but some historians think it's not entirely impossible. The prince, after all, brought her name back into every conversation. And Versailles, like all stages, can't resist a good comeback arc. You catch her late one night standing in front of a mirror, a folded copy of the most vulgar engraving in her hands. She stares at it, lips twitching. Then she folds it neatly and tucks it into her drawer beside her rosary. Balance. Because Jeanne du Barry is nothing if not the perfect contradiction. You're in a salon scented with sandalwood and scandal. The drapes are drawn to filter the August heat, and the women in attendance fan themselves with such synchronized precision you'd think they'd been rehearsing. Conversation is lazy, looping, like a parasol spinning in the breeze, until someone, an old duchess with a tongue sharpened like a paper knife, leans forward and whispers, "Have you heard about the diamond necklace?" Just like that, the parasol spins no more. It starts as gossip. Everything in Versailles does. A necklace so heavy with diamonds it has its own gravitational pull. Supposedly commissioned years ago by Louis XV for Madame de Pompadour, only she died before it could be finished. Now the necklace sits, unwanted and unpaid for, in the hands of desperate jewellers. 30 years' worth of diamonds, enough to bankrupt a minor kingdom, braided into a glittering monstrosity. Naturally, the jewellers think of Jeanne, because if anyone could convince a king to buy something outrageously expensive, it's the Comtesse du Barry. Never mind that she had nothing to do with it, never mind that she's no longer in Louis XV's ear the way she used to be. Never mind that she's quietly trying to build a reputation as a patron of art and virtue, not gluttony and glitter. The rumour fits too perfectly. You follow the trail and it grows teeth fast. One pamphlet claims she ordered the necklace secretly using taxpayer funds. Another says she promised it to a foreign prince in exchange for political leverage. A third insists she wears it already, hidden beneath her corsets like a second spine. None of it's true, but that doesn't matter. This is Versailles. Truth is just rumour with worse marketing. Here's where it gets even weirder. A woman named Jeanne de la Motte enters the story, a con artist with just enough noble blood to open a few doors and just enough cunning to kick them wide open. She claims she's close to Queen Marie Antoinette. She tells the jewellers that the Queen wants the necklace, has asked her to help negotiate the purchase. In secret, of course. She even produces letters, real seals, flowing script, forged, all of it. But good enough to fool people who want to be fooled. The jewellers fall for it. So does a cardinal desperate to win the Queen's favour. The necklace is handed over, not to the Queen, to the thieves. The diamonds are broken apart, sold off. By the time anyone realises the truth, the necklace is gone. And the whispers? They aim straight at Jeanne du Barry. Of course she was involved, someone mutters in the drawing room. It smells like her. She never really left court, says another. She just operates from the shadows now. She probably gave the necklace to one of her dogs, a third suggests, and everyone laughs. But no one denies it. The Queen is livid. Rightly so. She's been humiliated, publicly associated with a scam that reeks of greed and bad taste. But instead of focusing her anger on the con artists, she turns it toward the easiest target, Jeanne. Never mind that Jeanne had nothing to do with it. Never mind that she's older now, more careful, less flamboyant. Never mind that she's just trying to maintain some shred of peace. Marie Antoinette doesn't want apologies, she wants someone to blame. This moment, strange as it sounds, marks a turning point for Jeanne, because now she's not just a mistress or a scandal, she's a symbol, a warning, a punchline. Her name becomes shorthand for everything the revolution will later claim to hate. Decadence, corruption, luxury without responsibility. Even though, again, she's not responsible for any of this. But you know how history works. It's not about facts, it's about narrative. She tries to push back, not publicly, that would be unseemly. But she invites the jewellers to her apartments, asks them gently whether her name ever appeared in any letter. Of course not, they say. But the damage is done. The court has decided. The Queen has decided. And Versailles only remembers what's whispered most often. Now here's your strange but true fact for tonight. The actual affair of the diamond necklace happened after Jeanne's fall from court. She was not involved. At all. Not even peripherally. But her name was invoked by gossips and printers alike, simply because she represented the type of woman who would have done it, if given the chance. That's what makes it so cruel, and so effective. She's an easy scapegoat, she's too visible, too beautiful, too convenient, and she knows it. You see her less frequently now, her salons are quieter. The artists still come, but they linger less. The musicians play softer pieces. The laughter is there, but it ends more quickly. She smiles, but not as often. Not defeated, but aware. Even Louis is distant. Age has gripped him, and with it a sluggishness that makes him forget his passions. His coughs come harder now, his gait slower. Sometimes he forgets what day it is. Sometimes he forgets her name. It's not malice, it's time. And time is more brutal than scandal. Still, Jeanne persists. She still rises at dawn, still chooses her gowns carefully, still writes notes to her tailors and sketches new embroidery patterns. She still visits the poorhouses she funds, still sponsors the artists who make her memory softer. But the glint is fading. The necklace never touched her skin. But its shadow has settled across her shoulders like lead. And Versailles, fickle creature that it is, begins to turn its head, looking for the next glittering disaster, even as the last one quietly closes her doors. It's a masquerade, of course, because when everything starts to fall apart at Versailles, people put on masks and pretend it's theatre. The invitations arrive on thick vellum, inked in gold and sealed with the dauphine's crest, though everyone knows she had little to do with the planning. These events are meant to distract the court from its own unravelling. But distraction in Versailles is never innocent. It's camouflage. You step into the ballroom under the shimmer of thousands of candles, reflected in mirrored walls and the lacquered eyes of porcelain figurines. The room smells of citrus, wax, and anticipation. Everyone's wearing something absurd: Venetian masks with exaggerated brows, satin suits with stuffed swan necks, gowns with cages so wide they catch in doorways. Nobles are pretending to be shepherds, shepherds are pretending to be mythological gods, and somewhere in the middle of it all is Jeanne du Barry, unmasked. She wears no disguise tonight. That's her mask. Her gown is black velvet, simple but cut within an inch of immodesty, trimmed in blood-red ribbon at the sleeves and neckline. Her only jewellery is a ruby pendant shaped like a teardrop. Her hair is pulled high but not powdered. A deliberate choice. She's already been painted in white. Now she comes as she is, defiant, direct, undeniable. The court watches her the way wolves watch a limping deer, half hungry, half suspicious. Why is she here? Why now? Oh, the king hasn't been to a public gathering in weeks. His health is failing fast, and so is his influence. Without him, Jeanne is technically nobody. Just another noblewoman with a title bought by royal favour and loathed by royal blood. But she doesn't act like nobody. She moves through the room like someone still in orbit, still shining from borrowed sunlight. And perhaps she is. Or perhaps she's just reminding them all that her name still echoes down the gold halls, no matter who tries to forget it. Tonight is different, though. You can feel it. The mask has teeth. Jeanne stands near a column, watching two masked men dance. Their costumes are matching. Both dressed as King Louis XIV, the Sun King himself, but with grotesque exaggerations. Huge wigs, melting faces, crowns made from painted bread loaves. It's satire, and not subtle. The courtiers around them laugh too loudly. You catch someone mutter, "A preview of the future, perhaps." Someone else says, "The Queen should see this." Jeanne does not laugh. She just watches. You move closer and notice the tension building in the crowd. Someone dressed as a priest staggers by, drunk and mocking the host. Another in a pig mask snorts at a passing cardinal. It's all in good fun, they say, but the fun has a bitter edge now. The satire is aimed in every direction. At the monarchy, at the church, at Jeanne. One dancer spins toward her, mask grinning. "And who are you tonight?" he asks, voice slurred. She tilts her head. "I'm the only one not pretending." He bows mockingly and stumbles away. Later, she finds herself at the edge of the hall alone. A woman in a harlequin mask approaches her, slim, elegant, voice too young to carry this much disdain. "I'm surprised you came," she says. Jeanne replies, "So am I." They don't introduce themselves. They don't have to. It's Marie Antoinette, the queen in waiting who's been queen in all but name for months now. Her tone is light, but you can hear the strain. The court may mock Jeanne, but Marie has learned how fast they turn. Her face remains serene, but her hands clutch her fan a little too tightly. "You'll find the theme of the evening is transformation," the dauphine says, glancing at the chaos unfolding. "Fitting, isn't it?" Jeanne meets her gaze. "We've all transformed. Some of us into ghosts." A pause. Then Marie smiles. Cold. Brittle. "Some ghosts never leave." And then she walks away. You feel the temperature drop as Jeanne exhales. She doesn't chase her. She doesn't respond. She simply drifts toward the balcony, leaving behind a trail of silence the size of a throne. Here's your strange poetic sidebar. This masquerade is remembered in at least 3 different court memoirs, and none of them agree on what Jeanne wore. Some say red, some say white. One insists she came disguised as a goddess of fortune. Another claims she left early, crying. The records are confused, blurred, like memories filtered through too much wine and too many decades. But what they all agree on is this. Something shifted that night, not just for Jeanne but for Versailles. The masks are slipping. The satire is too sharp, the jokes are too honest. The laughter sounds like warning bells. Back inside, a papier-mâché guillotine has been set up as part of a comedy act. The judgment of the court, they call it. People volunteer each other for fake execution. Heads are placed in the wooden frame and the audience howls as the blade drops with a clap of painted cardboard. You watch Jeanne watching it. She doesn't smile. That night, as the party winds down and the mirrors reflect back the wreckage, torn lace, spilled wine, powdered wigs askew, Jeanne walks home alone. Not escorted, not announced. She slips through the halls like a memory, more myth than woman. In her rooms, she removes the velvet gown carefully. She sits before her mirror, and studies her reflection without speaking. Then she opens a drawer and pulls out an old paper engraving. You recognise it, one of the more vulgar ones, now folded and faded. She looks at it, then at herself, and shakes her head. They still think that's all I am, she says to the silence. Not defeated, just tired. Scholars will later say this masquerade was symbolic, that it marked the moment when the court turned on itself, when the illusion of control cracked just wide enough to let in the rot. Some will say Jeanne's presence that night was brave, others will call it desperate. But you saw the room, you saw the queen flinch, and you saw the woman with no mask walk through a crowd of people hiding behind their own. There's a garden tucked behind the east wing of Versailles that most people don't bother with. It doesn't have the grandeur of the orangery or the sweeping drama of the Grand Canal. It's smaller, quiet, full of crooked paths and slightly overgrown hedges, like it's trying not to be noticed. Jeanne du Barry walks here often now. Not in display, not in defiance, just in need of quiet. Today the air is thick with the perfume of blooming jasmine, and the gravel crunches softly under her heels. She moves slowly, her eyes following a bee weaving through a rosebush. Her usual entourage is absent. No giggling ladies in waiting, no lapdog in ribbons, no fawning artists hoping for a commission. Just Jeanne and the garden, both slightly past their prime but still deeply, stubbornly alive. Versailles blooms around her in a way that feels spiteful. The court is full again, the salons are crowded, the balls loud. The Queen now hosts events nearly every night, draped in pastel gowns and false cheer, offering macarons and music like currency. There are whispers, of course, about the King's health, about money running low, about Paris getting restless, but up here in the gilded cage, they still pretend things are golden. Jeanne, however, feels the shift. The garden may be quiet, but it listens. The roses lean closer now, the hedges gossip. The birds sing like they're trying to remember something important, something old. She sits on a stone bench shaped like a seashell, running a hand across the worn surface. You sit beside her in silence. She doesn't acknowledge you, but you can tell she knows you're there. You can feel it too, can't you? She murmurs. It's all off. And it is, not dramatically, not yet, but the rhythm of a Versailles is fractured. Servants glance over their shoulders more often. Guards fidget, ministers stammer when the Queen enters. Even the laughter sounds rehearsed. Everything looks perfect, but everything is wrong. Jeanne receives fewer invitations now. Her name is still spoken, but only when no one thinks she's listening. She's no longer the centre of attention. She's the echo of a scandal everyone's trying to forget. A chapter people claim they've turned, but secretly reread when no one's watching. The new generation of courtiers, the ones raised under Pompadour's shadow, but bloomed under Jeanne's reign, have moved on. They sip wine and flirt under the chandeliers without remembering who taught them how to do it with style. They wear gowns in colours Jeanne made fashionable and pretend they thought of it themselves. Still, not everyone has left her side. She receives a letter today from a young playwright she once supported, thanking her for her early patronage. Without you, he writes, I would still be scraping poems into cafe tabletops. She smiles and tucks it away carefully, like a relic. It's one of the few things these days that doesn't feel poisoned. Here's your strange, overlooked detail of the day. Jeanne kept a personal garden journal, not filled with notes about plants, but about people. Names of guests who visited her salons, which musicians played well, which artists delivered late, even comments overheard in hallways. It was part planner, part memory vault, part survival tool. She called it her livre de pouce, her sprouting book. The pages smelled faintly of lavender and ink. You follow her deeper into the garden to a statue of Flora, the Roman goddess of flowers, half hidden by ivy. Jeanne places a hand on the base and whispers something. You don't catch the words. Maybe it's a prayer, maybe it's an insult, maybe it's both. Then she sits again, legs crossed at the ankle, like she's waiting for something. It's not long before she gets company. The Duchess of Gramont, sharp as ever, enters the garden under the pretence of a walk. Her dress is silver grey, her posture steel. She's one of Jeanne's oldest rivals, one of the few who's remained a constant thorn in her side, even as others drifted away. Today, though, she walks slower, less predatory. They exchange greetings that taste like lemon juice and diplomacy. Lovely day, the Duchess says. If you like the smell of overripe roses, Jeanne replies. They sit in awkward proximity, not speaking for several long minutes. Then the Duchess turns. They're saying the revolutionaries are printing your name again. Jeanne lifts an eyebrow. Oh yes, she continues, folding her hands. Some pamphlet calling you the Queen of Decadence. They say you bathe in milk while Paris starves. I haven't bathed in milk since never, Jeanne says dryly. The Duchess smirks. Doesn't matter. They believe it. Belief is louder than truth. They don't talk politics again, but the air hangs heavy with implication. When the Duchess leaves, Jeanne remains. She picks a jasmine blossom and holds it between her fingers like it might give her an answer. You can see the weight in her shoulders now. Not fear. She's never really feared the mob, but weariness. The kind that comes when you realise you've lived long enough to become not just a scandal, but a symbol. Historians argue about Jeanne's awareness in these final Versailles years. Did she understand how close the world was to cracking? Did she see the storm gathering in the distance? Some say yes, pointing to her growing reclusiveness, her refusal to entertain certain nobles. Others think she was simply trying to fade out gracefully, to retire into quiet dignity. But you've seen her. She doesn't fade. She recalculates. The garden becomes her refuge, a place where politics can't reach her, where she doesn't have to perform, where she can be the version of herself no engraving ever captured. One afternoon she catches you watching her and says softly, "This place is a lie, you know." You wait. "It's a beautiful one," she adds, "but a lie all the same." Then she smiles, the soft kind, the kind that ends dreams and begins legends, and the garden for a moment breathes with her. There are letters now, dozens of them, maybe hundreds, slipped under doors, passed in gloved hands, folded into fans, hidden behind fans. Not all of them addressed to Jeanne du Barry, of course. That would be too obvious. But many are about her. Her name appears in loops and curls of hurried ink, sometimes as Madame la Comtesse, other times as that woman. The phrasing changes. The intent does not. You catch one before it disappears into a coat pocket. It's unsigned, but you know the style. Clipped, smug, slightly too poetic to be clever. It reads, "She's the root, pull it up, and the garden might recover." Dramatic, yes, but there's something behind it. Not just snobbery, strategy, because this isn't gossip anymore. It's a plot. Jeanne has always lived on borrowed favour, and she's managed it with grace, walking the tightrope between being loved, feared and envied. But lately the court has grown restless. The Queen is no longer content to let her fade quietly into the wallpaper. And the King, well, the King is dying. Everyone knows it, even if they don't say it. His skin's waxy. His steps are slow. His appetite is gone. He speaks less, sleeps more. The physician says he has a mild infection. The servants say he reeks of rot. The truth is simpler than all of that. Louis XV, the once well-beloved, is unravelling from the inside out. Jeanne still visits him daily, still brings him silk handkerchiefs and little stories to make him smile, but she can feel him slipping, not just into illness, into silence. He no longer asks about her dresses. He forgets details. Once he calls her Pompadour. Another time he asks if her father has come to visit. He never knew her father. She leaves his room that day without speaking. Back in her apartments, she starts writing letters of her own. You peek at one, addressed to the Minister of the Interior. A polite request. A reminder of past support. A soft nudge. I hope I can still count on your discretion. It's not desperation, but it's close. For the first time, Jeanne sees that without the King's voice, her influence is paper-thin. And the court? The court smells at opportunity. Which brings us back to the real letters, the secret ones. They're not just about manoeuvring her out of favour. That ship has already sailed. They want her gone, removed, exiled. One particularly vicious note suggests she be sent to a convent for the safety of the monarchy. Another proposes a pension. Generous, but with strings. Total disappearance. No visits, no return. A few letters even suggest something darker, not in so many words, of course, but Versailles has a talent for making violence sound elegant. Let nature finish what scandal began. Jeanne learns about these letters, and she does not weep. She writes more, answers everyone she can identify, sometimes with charm, sometimes with ice, occasionally with an apology that feels like a dagger made of ribbon. I regret our last encounter ended on poor terms, she writes to the Duchesse de Noailles. I remember your pearls, they were lovely, as was your solence. And here's tonight's curious tidbit. Jeanne reportedly hired a handwriting expert, a court calligrapher of all things, to help her trace the authors of anonymous notes. It worked once. She matched the scrawl of a particularly nasty letter to a noblewoman who had, until then, sent Jane flowers every spring. The flowers stopped arriving. You follow her through the hallways now and see how the stairs have changed. People no longer glance at her out of jealousy or awe. They watch her like she's already a ghost, like they're waiting for her to vanish out and take their memories with her. One afternoon she walks past a pair of young courtiers whispering behind a tapestry. One says, "She'll be gone by the harvest." The other replies, "She'll be forgotten by the frost." Jeanne stops, turns, smiles, and I suppose I'd better wear something warm. The tapestry ripples as they flee, and yet it's not all venom. A few remain loyal. An older painter visits with sketches, hoping to begin a final portrait. A priest still writes to her from the countryside, offering prayers and subtle warnings. One even says, "Do not walk in the gardens at dusk." Jeanne burns that letter. She hosts one last salon, not because she expects it to save her, but because she refuses to leave without a curtain call. The guest list is smaller than before. Some nobles send regrets, others don't respond. But those who come find her radiant in navy and gold, her hair piled high like a crown, her eyes bright with something you'd almost call amusement. She toasts to art, to beauty, to those who dare to live outside their assigned paragraphs. The musicians play softly, the candles flicker as if listening. It's not a party, it's a farewell. She doesn't say it, she doesn't have to. Outside the letters keep moving. One is opened in the Queen's chambers. Marie Antoinette reads it, then smiles. It's from the Duc d'Aiguillon, a long-time enemy of Jeanne's, suggesting a convenient estate far from Paris. She'll be happy there, it says. She may even grow roses. The Queen sets it aside. Decision has been made. Jeanne returns to her garden the next morning. The roses are late to bloom this year. She picks one anyway, pricks her finger, watches the blood bead at the tip. "The only real thing left in this place," she mutters. She tucks the rose into her hair. Not for anyone else, just because. The king is dying and the Versailles has the decency to act surprised. You feel it in the hush of the corridors, in the way the courtiers walk a little faster but speak more quietly. It's as though everyone's trying to stay busy while pretending they aren't, watching the same slow clock tick toward the inevitable. The gilding hasn't dulled yet, but the air feels thick, like silk soaked in vinegar. Louis XV, once le bien-aimé, now lies in a private chamber that smells more of vinegar and camphor than royal cologne. His body is failing in layers, first the appetite, then the memory, and now the flesh. His face is sunken, his hands trembling, and even the powdered wig he insists on wearing seems like a cruel joke. His doctors say it's smallpox, others call it divine punishment. Jeanne just calls it him. She still visits every day. She enters without ceremony, without jewels, without that click of heels that once made whole rooms turn. Now it's only the whisper of skirts, a silver tray of broth, and soft, patient silence. You're there when she pulls up a chair beside his bed. He blinks at her like she's a dream, like he's not sure if she's still real, or already part of his afterlife. "You again," he murmurs, lips cracked and voice paper thin. "Yes," she says gently, "me again." She holds his hand carefully. The doctors have warned her, the lesions are contagious. Already 2 chambermaids have taken ill, and the halls around the royal apartments have been discreetly blocked off. But Jeanne doesn't care, or pretends not to. Either way, she's here. Everyone else has fled. Even the Queen is absent. Marie Leszczyńska is technically still alive, still in her apartments, but she has not come. The royal daughters hover in prayer, scandalized by the infection and of course by Jeanne. They want her gone, banished, forgotten before the body is even cold, but Louis still asks for her. Even now, that loyalty is a problem. The ministers argue outside his chambers. They don't speak her name out loud anymore, as if it will prolong the king's life or her influence. But they talk around it. Her, the favourite, the shame. They want her gone before the king dies. The optics, they say. The precedent. The politics. One noble mutters, "We cannot have the devil's mistress kneeling at the foot of a dying saint." The irony, of course, is that none of them have saints' records themselves. Jeanne hears it all. The whispers, the judgments, the plans. She doesn't react. She just returns each morning with clean linens and a small bottle of rosewater. She dabs the king's forehead. She hums lullabies she heard as a child, half-remembered convent tunes meant to soothe orphan girls and fading monarchs alike. One afternoon she opens the window to let in some air. The garden below is still, silent. A crow lands on the stone railing, stares at her for a full minute, then flies away. She watches it go, doesn't smile, doesn't move, just closes the window again. And then it happens. The king begins to mutter about sins, not political ones, personal, names long buried, loves he regrets, letters he never sent. He asks for absolution, for confession. The doctors exchange looks, the bishops are summoned. Jeanne knows what that means. If the king dies with her in the room, still his companion, still unrepentant, it risks his soul. In the church's eyes, if she leaves, he can be cleansed, absolved, made acceptable to God. The daughters press, the bishops hover, the courtiers sharpen their pens. She's the last barrier to redemption, and she moves it herself. Jeanne leaves, not in disgrace, not in tears, just quiet, dignified retreat. She kisses the king's hand, presses her forehead to his fingers, and walks out of the room. Here's your peculiar historical footnote. Louis XV's final hours were so plagued by infection that his attendants burned their clothes afterward. The linens were buried, the walls scrubbed with vinegar. The perfume couldn't cover the stench. Some said even death didn't want him. The day after she leaves his bedside, Jeanne is exiled. The word they use is retired. The phrase is sent away for rest. But everyone knows. Her belongings are packed, her staff dismissed. She's granted a modest pension and instructed to leave Versailles within 48 hours. No ceremony, no farewell. She doesn't protest, not openly. She takes one final walk through her apartments, touches the drapes, opens and closes the fan she kept by her bedside, runs her fingers along a silk pillow she had embroidered with cherry blossoms. You watch her take a last glance in the mirror. Then she turns to the servants and says, "Burn nothing, dust everything." Outside, the sky is overcast but dry. She climbs into the carriage dressed in grey, not black. No veil, no tears. Her hair is unpowdered, pinned back in a simple twist. A small dog sits at her feet, unaware that the chapter has ended. As the wheels roll away from the gates, the palace doesn't watch. It has already begun forgetting her. The king dies 3 days later. Versailles scrubs itself clean. The rooms are aired, the paintings rehung, the tapestries fluffed. The new king, Louis XVI, steps in like someone walking into a stranger's life. The queen, Marie Antoinette, rises as the new centre of gravity. The court pivots. And Jeanne, she is nowhere to be seen. Some say she weeps at the news of Louis's death. Others say she simply nods and orders new curtains for her modest country house. A few claim she keeps one of the king's handkerchiefs under her pillow. None of it is verifiable, but you saw her leave, and you know the truth. She was never just a mistress. She was a mirror Versailles could no longer bear to look into. The carriage bumps along the uneven road, moving farther from Versailles, with every muddy wheel turn, and Jeanne du Barry, once the most powerful woman at court who didn't wear a crown, watches the gilded past shrink in the distance like a vanishing painting. The palace disappears behind trees, then hills, then the slow curtain of exile, and still she does not cry. She's dressed modestly, but tastefully. Grey silk, a black ribbon around her neck, gloves that don't quite hide the tremor in her fingers. Beside her, a valise carries the last tokens of her former life. A few letters, a miniature portrait of Louis in a silver frame, and a lace handkerchief that once belonged to Madame de Pompadour. An ironic heirloom gifted in petty generosity years ago. Her destination is Louveciennes, a villa gifted to her by the king when the affair was still fresh and flattering. Nestled in the countryside, it's beautiful in a way that feels almost mocking now. White stone, symmetrical gardens, fountains that gurgle softly like they've never known scandal. A home designed for luxury, not for loneliness. As the carriage pulls up, servants rush out to meet her, their faces schooled into neutrality. They bow, but there's hesitance in it now. She's not the mistress of the king anymore. She's not the heart of the palace. She's just Jeanne. Inside, the rooms are colder than she remembers, or maybe it's just her skin. The furniture sits untouched, frozen in poses from a happier season. She touches a velvet armrest and half expects it to recoil. Everything here belonged to a life that is no longer hers. The next morning she wakes to birdsong and the smell of dew. Her windows overlook a cherry orchard just starting to bloom. She watches it like someone peeking through a keyhole into someone else's joy. Then she closes the shutters. This is exile in silk, technically voluntary, technically cushioned by privilege. But it still cuts. At Versailles, her absence is conspicuous for all of 10 minutes. A few murmurs pass through the salons. A duchess mentions her name, then checks to see who's listening. No one is. The court has new distractions now. Louis XVI, young and painfully earnest. Marie Antoinette, still beautiful, still bored. They are the future. Jeanne is the past, and Versailles hates remembering anything that doesn't sparkle. But not everyone forgets. She begins receiving letters. Some friendly, most cautious. Artists write to thank her again. A few nobles send careful notes full of lukewarm condolences and barbed blessings. I hope Louveciennes offers you peace now that your work is done. As if her life were a project that ended with a monarch's final breath. She responds to some, others she burns. Her staff is reduced but loyal. Zamor, her young servant, now a teenager, still flits around the villa with restless energy and slightly more confidence than he probably should have. She lets him. She trains her new cook herself, teaches the chambermaid how to fold linens properly. There is routine now, and where routine exists, grief cannot always stretch its legs. But make no mistake, she is grieving. Not just the king, not just Versailles. She is mourning the slow, quiet death of significance. Here's your odd, perfectly Jeanne detail of the day. In these early months of exile, she began ordering her own stationery. Cream-coloured paper, gold ink, monogram in the shape of a peacock feather. Because if she was going to be forgotten, she'd be forgotten beautifully. There are rumours, of course. They follow her like perfume. One claims she's opened a brothel in the countryside. Another insists she's training young girls to seduce noblemen and reclaim her influence through a shadow network of charm. Absurd, predictable, but it stings nonetheless. She goes into town sometimes, discreetly, always veiled. She shops for silks she won't wear and pastries she doesn't eat. The villagers stare. Some recognise her. Most just pretend they do. Children whisper, "She used to be a queen," and their mothers shush them, afraid to look too long. One day she's approached by an older woman who curtsies too deeply and says, "My daughter has your colouring." Jeanne smiles, touches the woman's cheek and says, "Then she must be dangerous." That's the end of it. She still reads the Parisian papers, carefully, slowly. Every story about Versailles is an exercise in memory management. She circles names she once knew intimately, ministers she once toasted, courtiers she once outdressed. Now they move on without her, like actors in a play that didn't need her after all. But not all news is distant. She hears that the Queen has banned any mention of her name at court, that a new mistress has not yet emerged, that the King is awkward, indecisive, unsure what to do with the palace his grandfather left behind. Jeanne chuckles. "Poor boy," she says. "No one told him Versailles is an animal, not a home." One afternoon she walks through the gardens at Louveciennes, trailing her fingers along the hedges. A rose thorn catches her glove and tears it open. She looks at the gash, small, almost insignificant, and starts to laugh. For 5 full minutes, until her knees shake. Then she gathers herself, presses her thumb to the wound, and walks on. Historians debate the significance of Jeanne's exile. Some call it merciful, she escaped the revolution by being irrelevant. Others say it was crueler than execution, to live in the shadow of power, stripped of voice, wrapped in quiet mockery. A few believe she was content, that Louveciennes suited her, that she preferred the peace. You know better. She didn't want peace. She wanted presence. But Versailles only has room for one myth at a time, and now the myth wears a powder blue gown and speaks French with a lilt. So Jeanne stays in her garden, tending roses, teaching silence how to wear perfume. You wake to thunder, not from the sky, but from the streets. Distant, rolling, growing closer each day like a beast dragging chains behind it. Louveciennes is still peaceful on the surface. The fountains still babble. The gardeners still trim hedges with absurd precision. But the newspapers Jeanne reads at breakfast are inked in fear now. Paris has turned. The grumbling that once hovered in taverns has surged into shouting, into marching, into revolution. It starts with bread, it always does, and then taxes, then nobles, then heads. At first, Jeanne watches from the sidelines. Not indifferent, just uncertain how close this storm will come. She's been the centre of attention before, now she's out of frame, a footnote in silk. But footnotes don't always stay silent, especially when they wear pearls the people can't afford. The whispers begin again, this time not from courtiers, but from pamphleteers. Her name surfaces in underground papers, lumped in with the Queen, the aristocracy, the rot of the old regime. Never mind that she's been gone from court for years. Never mind that she hasn't spoken to Marie Antoinette since Louis XV died. History is being rewritten in real time, and Jeanne is back on the cast list, this time as villain. You see the first sign of real danger when a courier arrives, panting, his boots caked in mud. He hands Jeanne a letter with no return name, just a seal marked in red wax, a crude guillotine. Inside is a single line. You lived off the people. Now the people will live off you. She folds it carefully, says nothing, pours herself more coffee. Her staff is on edge. Zamor, now taller and angrier, mutters that he's seen men lurking near the gate. He asks if they should leave. "Where would we go?" Jeanne replies. "I've already been sent away once. I won't run again." But even she can feel the tension now. The silence is too loud, the birdsong is too sharp. She takes shorter walks, no longer veiled, but definitely watched. When she ventures into town, shopkeepers greet her with stiff nods and eyes that dart to windows. Then one morning the knocking comes. Not soldiers, yet. Just two men in plain clothes, carrying badges like clubs. They are from the Revolutionary Tribunal. They enter without bowing. Asked to search the property. Jeanne, always gracious even to the wolves, welcomes them in. They rifle through her drawers, her books, her letters. They confiscate a painting of Louis XV, evidence of loyalty to tyranny, a bronze crucifix, royalist religious iconography. Even a silver hairbrush is noted down. She asks if they'd like tea. They decline. Before they leave, one turns and says, "You're not forgotten, madame." She smiles. How flattering. The next week they return. This time they bring a warrant. She is to be arrested, charged with misuse of public funds, collusion with the monarchy, and corruption of national morality. It's a mouthful and most of it is nonsense. But justice in this new France is not about accuracy. It's about theatre. And Jeanne has always been box office gold, and she packs her own bag, just one, a few dresses, a single pearl earring, her garden journal, a small velvet pouch of coins. She asks the staff to stay. "There's no need for all of us to burn," she says. Zamor argues. She silences him with a look. "You've got your whole life to be angry," she tells him. "Don't waste it on ghosts." As she steps into the waiting carriage, not the elegant one she's used to, but a government wagon that smells of rust, she glances back at the villa. "I always said this place had too many mirrors," she murmurs. The journey to Paris is slow and watched. Peasants stop to gawk. Some recognise her, others guess. A boy throws a rock. It hits the wheel. The guards laugh. She arrives at Saint-Pélagie prison under grey skies. The gates are iron, the air is damp, and the cells smell like old paper and mildew. Her room has no mirror, no window, just a cot and a bowl. She sits, waits. At first, she's given a small degree of courtesy. Her name still carries weight, even here. A few guards treat her like a curiosity. "The king's whore," they whisper, as if it's an exhibit in the Louvre. But others are crueler. One spits in her water. Another smears excrement on her cell door. She cleans it herself, because no one else will. She's interrogated. Repeatedly. Asked about secret bank accounts, hidden messages, correspondence with the Austrian, Marie Antoinette, still fighting her own losing war in the shadows. Jeanne answers truthfully, but it doesn't matter. The questions aren't about answers, they are about grinding her down. And here's your chilling historical gem. During this time, she begins having dreams, vivid ones. She writes them in her garden journal. One reads, "A red ribbon floats in a basin. I reach for it. My hand comes back empty." She stops writing after that. Word spreads that her trial is coming. A formality, really, a performance. The verdict has already been written. She's just needed to recite her lines. One night, a sympathetic jailer brings her a mirror, just a small shard. She studies herself in it for a long time, then says aloud, "Still here." Not a prayer, a statement, still here. The revolution doesn't care, it's hungry, it needs blood to fuel the myth. And Jeanne, she's a convenient offering. Not noble enough to mourn, not low enough to ignore, just scandalous enough to entertain. She doesn't cry, she doesn't beg, but when the final summons comes and she's told she'll be transported to the conciergerie, she asks for something strange. She asks for perfume. The guard raises an eyebrow. She repeats gently, "Please, I want to smell like myself." And so she does. She's led out the next morning in lilac and rosewater, head held high, hands bound like they were always meant to carry the weight of other people's sins. They dress her in white, not because it's clean or poetic, but because it's protocol. A plain chemise, a simple cap to hold back her hair. White is what the condemned wear. It's supposed to be a blank canvas, a reminder that the slate is about to be wiped clean. Jeanne Bécu looks down at herself and mutters, "I always said I looked terrible in white." No one laughs. She's at the conciergerie now, the so-called antechamber to death, tucked along the Seine like a damp secret. The prison is colder here, harder. The air feels bruised. The walls weep quietly in the mornings. Jeanne shares a cell with two women, one old, one catatonic. She speaks to neither. Not out of pride, but self-preservation. People disappear here. Names vanish with a whisper. No point getting attached. The trial happens quickly. Too quickly, 2 days. A blur of accusation shouted more than spoken. Jeanne sits upright in the dock, listening as her life is reduced to a list of indulgences. They don't even try to be clever. One prosecutor reads from an old pamphlet. The necklace, the carriages, the sweets. He spits the word sweets like it's a war crime. She tries to defend herself calmly. "I never wore the necklace. I paid for my own carriages, and the sweets were for my guests." It's hopeless. Her past has been edited for them. She's not a person anymore. She's a symbol. Decadence incarnate, her Bombay. The king's poison, the final straw. One juror whispers, "She smells like soap." Another answers, "So did Marie Antoinette." There is no jury deliberation. They hand down her sentence before the ink on the transcript is dry. Guilty, condemned to death by guillotine, execution scheduled for the next morning. That night she doesn't sleep, not because of fear, because of memory. She lies on the straw mattress and stares at the ceiling, running through a lifetime of silk and lace, wigs and wine, music and mirrors. She thinks about the king, his laugh, the way his eyes drifted when he grew tired. She thinks about the garden at Louveciennes, the way the roses arched when they bloomed too quickly. She thinks about her mother, her convent days, her first powdered wig, her first lie that brought her an inch closer to Versailles. She does not think about remorse. At dawn, a guard brings her a ribbon, red, for her hair. Jeanne raises an eyebrow. "Subtle," she says. "You're allowed one request," he offers, "before you go." She doesn't ask for a priest, she doesn't ask for a final meal, she asks for her perfume. They bring it. Not because they're kind, because they're curious. What kind of woman faces death with scent? It's a bottle of orange blossom and jasmine. A custom blend she once wore during a masquerade where someone said she smelled like summer pretending to be spring. She dabs it behind her ears, at the base of her throat, then hands the bottle back. "For your wife," she says. He's speechless. She's not. The tumbril is waiting. It's always a cart, never a carriage. No shock-absorbing wheels, just wooden slats and iron nails. She climbs in unassisted, the white fabric flaring around her like spilled milk. They don't bind her hands, but they do chain her ankles. For balance, they claim. She knows it's to stop her from running. The streets are loud already, not with celebration, those days are gone, but with curiosity. People come out to see the execution like they'd attend a matinee. "It's the king's mistress," someone shouts. "Du Barry," another replies. "Is that her? She looks older." A third. "She looks like us." And that's the worst thing. They wanted a monster. They got a woman with perfume on her neck and no crown to cushion her fall. She doesn't speak until they pass a flower stall. Then she says quietly, "Tell the vendor her tulips are underpriced." The guard pretends not to hear. The cart reaches the scaffold just after 9. It's still damp from the morning fog. The executioner nods to her without ceremony. His hands are calloused, his eyes dull. This isn't theatre for him, it's a Tuesday. She ascends the steps with difficulty, chains, age, dignity all conspiring against her. Halfway up she stumbles. "I beg your pardon," she says to the executioner. The crowd hears it. It becomes legend. That one sentence, apologising to the man about to kill her, outlasts every salon she hosted, every diamond she wore. "I beg your pardon." She reaches the top. The blade gleams like it's been waiting for her. She kneels. She does not scream. The crowd leans forward. No one breathes. Then silence. Then thunder. It's over. Just like that. They hold up her head for the crowd, but no one cheers. There's a strange hush. Someone drops their bread. A child cries, confused. The perfume still lingers. Here's your final odd tragic flourish. Jeanne's body was buried in a mass grave outside the city, marked only by a wooden post. It was later said that even weeks after, you could smell orange blossom in the soil. Of course, that's nonsense, but people believe it. Because myths are made from details, not truth. And Jeanne, she was always the detail that no one could quite erase. Time skips like a scratched record after an execution. The guillotine doesn't just cut heads, it severs rhythm, interrupts memory. One moment Jeanne de Barry is a perfume-slick silhouette on a scaffold. The next, she's gone, vanished into the ledger of the dead, filed beneath aristocrat, whore, traitor, take your pick. Paris moves on. The revolution continues spinning, devouring names, noble and not, as if they're crumbs on a cracked plate. But forgetting Jeanne isn't as easy as slicing her throat. The city starts whispering again almost immediately. She becomes a cautionary tale first. Parents tell their daughters not to dream too high. Look what happened to Madame du Barry, they say, pointing toward empty corners where ghosts might be hiding. In pamphlets, she's repackaged as a royal succubus, a silk-draped symptom of the monarchy's rotted core. Her execution is held up as proof that justice doesn't spare the beautiful, or the famous, or the charming. But there's a problem. She won't stay quiet. You start seeing her name in stranger places, graffiti scrawled on alley walls in Montmartre, poems pinned anonymously to trees, tavern songs that end in a line about the mistress of mirrors. The court may have erased her from its salons, but Paris, hungry, volatile, and strangely sentimental, can't quite let her go. A rumour floats up one market day. Du Barry wept before the blade. Another, she kissed the executioner's hand. A third, she laughed and told him to make it quick, darling. None are confirmed. All are believed. She's gone, and yet somehow she's everywhere. Even the revolutionaries, those proud architects of the guillotine, can't help but linger on her. Robespierre's own journals include a single cryptic line: "The perfume of corruption outlasts its wearer." No name attached, but everyone knows who he meant. Meanwhile, across the Channel, the British papers are feasting. Jeanne du Barry, once a quiet scandal in Versailles, is now an exportable tragedy. The English adore her story, a commoner lifted by love, devoured by envy, cut down by history. They draw cartoons of her, some elegant, some grotesque. In one, she's depicted as a weeping statue draped in chains of roses. In another, she's dancing with death in a powdered wig, smiling as she falls into the abyss. London salons begin debating whether she deserved it. Some say yes, she lived by vanity, and vanity must die. Others write defences. One poet refers to her as the last beautiful thing to die in the old world. It's hyperbole, of course, but it sticks. And here's a delightful, strange truth. Years after her death, an enterprising merchant begins selling imitation Du Barry perfume, a blend of orange blossom, musk and mystery. The label reads, "The scent that conquered a king," that is wildly popular among middle-class women who long for a whiff of fallen glamour. No one talks about the guillotine when they spray it on their wrists. Back in Paris, her old villa at Louveciennes sits shuttered, overgrown. Some say it's haunted. Children dare each other to sneak into the gardens at dusk. One boy claims to have seen her, pale and barefoot, brushing her hair beneath the cherry trees. He swears she looked at him and smiled. He doesn't sleep for 3 nights. The property changes hands in silence. Records are vague. Rumours swirl that documents were forged to erase her name from the deed. That aristocrats hoping to distance themselves from the revolution quietly scrubbed her from their family trees. But they can't scrub the stories, like the one about the necklace. You remember that, right? The black diamond affair, the necklace she didn't wear. After her execution, the myth returns in full force. Pamphlets claim she orchestrated the entire scandal, that it was part of a secret royal plot. They print fake letters with her forged signature, looped and elegant, full of imagined betrayal. One even claims she was a spy, not for France, but for England. You laugh, Jeanne would have loved that one. Scholars today still argue over her. Was she a victim? A villain? A manipulator or manipulated? Some insist she was merely a pawn in a game she didn't invent. Others see her as a soft tyrant, gilded in affection and sharpened by power. What's clear is this: she mattered. She was not just ornament. She was not just arm candy. She was the story Versailles didn't know it was telling until it ended in blood. And then there are the others. The ones who remember quietly, the artists she once commissioned, the musicians who played for her and received their first real coin, the playwright whose career she saved. They remember a woman who listened, who laughed with her whole body, who gave generously, who asked questions, who knew she was being watched and played the part anyway. One painter, decades later, claims he still dreams of her. Not her beauty, he says, her stillness, the way she could sit in a room and make you forget you were supposed to impress her. Another, older still, claims he keeps a sketch she gave him. She drew herself, he whispers, not how she looked, how she felt. The drawing is simple. A woman's silhouette, seated with her back turned, hair pinned high, facing a window. Beyond the window, just the faintest trace of light. You look at it and realise what you've always suspected. Jeanne du Barry didn't just survive Versailles, she understood it. And that's why they had to kill her. Not because she was frivolous, but because she made meaning in a place that only wanted distraction. Because she learned how to wear silence like silk. Because she never stopped smelling like a queen. The years roll forward like a rusted wheel, uneven, loud in places, utterly silent in others. Jeanne du Barry's name fades, resurfaces, mutates. Paris goes through every phase of grief imaginable. Bloody pride, trembling remorse, historical amnesia. Streets are renamed, palaces are looted. The revolution burns through itself like an angry star, and in its ashes, the world decides how to remember its fallen players. And Jeanne? She becomes legend, caricature, caution, muse. People don't speak her name at Versailles anymore, but they walk past the places where she once stood. The salon near the king's private apartments. She used to receive guests there, perfumed and clever. Now it's a disused room with dusty brocade curtains and no plaque on the door. But the air still feels heavy there, like it's keeping a secret. The servants, when they sweep that wing, work it a little faster. No one says why. Decades pass and her portrait, yes, that one, reappears. The oil is cracked around the eyes, but the smirk is still intact. The neckline is still far too low for propriety. It's found behind a false wall in an old noble estate, wrapped in linen and forgotten by people who are too afraid to destroy it. A collector buys it, then a museum, then a debate begins. Should it hang with the other mistresses, the Pompadours, the Montespan, or is du Barry something else? They give her a corner. Low light, no label at first, but the visitors pause longer in front of her than they do anywhere else. Because here's the thing, Jeanne du Barry refuses to be categorised. She doesn't fit cleanly into the roles history wants women to play. She wasn't just a mistress, she wasn't just a victim, she wasn't only charming or only vain, she was all of it, and she lived it without apology. A new wave of historians arrives, women mostly, and a few irreverent men. They dig through court letters, retranslate the old memoirs, point out where the stories were edited by enemies and obsessed fanboys. They start to challenge the narrative. Maybe du Barry wasn't the moral cancer of France. Maybe she was a scapegoat, a product of hypocrisy wrapped in lace. Maybe the real sin wasn't that she rose, but that she rose too far without permission. One scholar publishes an essay titled "The Woman Who Survived Her Own Myth." It argues that Jeanne's greatest threat to the court wasn't her beauty or her closeness to the king, but her persistence. She stayed visible. She refused to fade. Even when they told her to disappear, she lingered like smoke in velvet drapes. You imagine Jeanne reading it, one eyebrow raised. "About time," she might mutter, flicking her fan. In the countryside, the villa at Louveciennes still stands, albeit with a different name now. It's been bought and sold a dozen times. A few owners tried to renovate the gardens back to their original state, but the roses never grew the same way. The cherry trees she once favoured bloomed too early one year, then not at all the next. Locals say it's cursed. The practical among them say it's just bad soil. Every so often someone spots a woman walking the grounds at dusk, hair pinned high, arms folded like she's waiting for someone late to arrive. The sightings never make the papers, but they linger in town gossip. She didn't die properly, one old woman says. That kind of death leaves stains. And here's tonight's delicious fringe fact. In the early 1900s, a perfume house recreated her personal scent entirely by accident. The formula was found in a centuries-old book of aristocratic odours and essences attributed only to Le Favorite Oublié, the forgotten favourite. It's sold under a different name, of course, but connoisseurs swore it smelled like desire on the edge of ruin. The myth holds, even when no one wants to hold it. Jeanne gets a second life in film, you knew that was coming. The first version is silent, black and white, with the pianist frantically pounding out pathos as she dies, arm extended, a single rose dropping from her hand. The second is technicolor nonsense, full of heaving bosoms and dialogue like, "Your love is my crown, sire." Jeanne would have hated it, probably, or watched it twice and quoted it sarcastically at dinner parties. More films follow, some sexed up, some sanitized. In one, she's played by an Italian actress who barely speaks French and is dubbed by a woman from Lyon. In another, she's turned into a proto-feminist icon, tossing powdered wigs off a balcony and proclaiming liberty in a silk nightgown. They're not all accurate, most aren't, but it doesn't matter, because even bad stories keep her alive. In academic circles, her story becomes required reading in discussions of courtly politics, female agency and propaganda. Professors argue over her choices. Was she complicit in royal corruption, or merely adaptive, a survivor making her way through a world rigged against her? They dig into her patronage of the arts, her charitable donations, her obsession with fragrance and self-image. Even her infamous garden journal becomes a case study in soft power and psychological self-preservation. It's displayed once briefly in a travelling exhibit called The Private Lives of Public Women. One entry reads simply, "They hated me before I opened my mouth." That hits a little too close for most visitors, and eventually, inevitably, someone writes the book, Du Barry, The Mistress Who Outlived the Court. It's part biography, part myth repair, part cultural reckoning. It's not a bestseller, but it's read, taught, admired. In the final chapter, the author imagines Jeanne standing in front of the guillotine one last time, not afraid, not ashamed, just tired of being misinterpreted. You sit with that image for a long time, because now, centuries later, it finally seems clear. Jeanne du Barry wasn't executed because she was extravagant, or manipulative, or scandalous, or ominous. She was executed because she refused to vanish, because she loved beauty in an ugly world, because she smelled like defiance, and defiance, especially when it wears lipstick, always costs more than it should. Versailles has been restored, trubbed, patched, powdered and polished to look exactly like the fantasy it always pretended to be. Tourists glide through its echoing halls in sneakers and audio guides, necks craned, eyes wide. The Hall of Mirrors still dazzles, the chandeliers still glitter, and the portraits of kings and queens still loom from every gold-framed corner. But there's a strange chill to it all, like an actor frozen mid-curtsy. Perfect but soulless. You return here, centuries late but right on time, stepping through the iron gates not as a guest or a noble or a scandal, but as a witness. The ghosts here are quiet, not because they are at rest, but because they've seen this all before. You drift through the corridors, past the Queen's apartments and the chapel, past salons once alive with perfume and treason. You pass a room that used to be part of the King's private suite, the place where Jeanne du Barry once whispered soft jokes into the ears of a monarch who loved being loved. No plaque, no velvet rope, just parquet floors and air that smells faintly of old varnish and ambition. And there it is, the portrait. She's been moved again, hung in a side hallway near a lesser-known staircase tucked between two oil landscapes and a tapestry no one can remember the story behind. The light is poor, the frame is chipped, but she's still there, still looking over her shoulder, still daring you to underestimate her. You stand in front of her for a long time. She doesn't blink. Jeanne du Barry was never meant to last. Not in this world, not in this palace. She was the wrong class, the wrong blood, the wrong kind of clever. But here she is, centuries later, refusing to go quietly. Not royalty, not nobility, just raw force wrapped in silk and scented with jasmine. And you remember everything. You remember her first curtsy in a hallway lined with enemies, and how she smiled anyway. You remember the whispered prayers from jealous women, hoping she'd trip on her own silk train. You remember the garden at Louveciennes, the roses blooming too fast, too late. You remember the masquerade and the moment she chose not to wear a mask while everyone else clung to theirs. You remember her perfume on the scaffold, a final act of control in a world that stripped everything else away. But mostly you remember her persistence. Jeanne wasn't supposed to become a myth. She was supposed to be forgotten. A pretty face with a sharp tongue, swept away like so many others before her. But she wasn't like the others. She knew the rules, broke them anyway, wrote her own lines when the script bored her, played her part to the hilt and then tore down the stage when no one applauded. Here's a quiet little detail. Somewhere in the archives there's a letter written by a palace laundress, a nobody, someone history forgot immediately. It's addressed to her sister in Lyon, dated just after Jeanne's execution. In it she writes, "They speak of her with such hate, but she always tipped me twice. I think they feared her because she laughed." It's not much, but it's something, because in the end, that's how myths survive. Not in monuments, not in marble, but in small stubborn memories, a scrap of perfume, a well-worn insult, a ribbon in the wrong drawer, a name that tastes like rebellion when whispered in the wrong place. You move on, past the portrait, down the stairwell. The sound of your footsteps echoes, soft and steady, the same rhythm Jeanne would have known by heart, the same path she once took when she wasn't allowed to use the grand stairs, the same path she climbed in silence after being made a countess, the same path she descended, days before exile, when the court looked away and never looked back. You glance at the visitors bustling through Versailles today, wide-eyed couples, tired parents, teenagers taking selfies. None of them know her, not really. They know Marie Antoinette's cake, Louis XIV's son, the furniture, the mirrors. But not Jeanne. She lingers in the blind spots, where real stories live. Outside, the gardens sprawl in arrogant symmetry, as though nothing had ever happened here. But you know better. You walk through the flowers she once touched, smell the air she once used to hide her sadness. You imagine her standing just off the path, not smiling, not waving, just watching, hands behind her back, as if she's waiting for someone to admit what they did to her. And just before you leave, as the sky darkens and the tourists begin to dwindle, you look back at the palace. And there she is. Not literally, just in your mind, the red ribbon in her hair, the tilt of her chin, the quiet thunder of her not apology, Jeanne du Barry, the mistress who survived in memory longer than she ever did in favour. The scandal that couldn't be erased, the perfume that outlasted the crown. So here we are at the end of a story that was never supposed to last this long. A tale of a girl born behind a butcher shop who danced her way into the most powerful palace in Europe, only to be dragged down by the very elegance she once embodied. Jeanne du Barry didn't start revolutions or pen manifestos. She didn't command armies. She didn't rule from a throne. And yet, her life managed to brush against every fragile fault line in a dying monarchy. You've walked with her, through powdered salons and whispered hallways, past oil portraits and petty rivalries, through a masquerade of envy and powdered fear. You watched her fight for a voice in a world that handed her diamonds but never dignity. You watched her fall, yes, but not crumble. And that distinction matters. Because Jeanne didn't just live in the margins, she wrote in them. With lipstick and lace and laughter, with generosity and gall, with unapologetic ambition in a century that offered women very few choices outside of marriage, servitude or silence. And when the blade came for her, she met it in perfume and velvet, daring history to blink first. The world she knew, Versailles, the monarchy, that whole delicate, scented illusion, collapsed not long after she left it. In many ways, she was its warning shot, a reminder that beauty doesn't make you safe, and that power borrowed on desire is always conditional. But here's the secret Versailles tried to bury with her. Jeanne du Barry never really needed their titles. They needed her charm, her heat, her humanity. Without her, the whole gilded thing looked colder, meaner, more like a cage. So if you remember her now, on a night like this, with the lights dim and the past humming just beneath the surface, remember the woman who smiled in the face of shame, who laughed at judgment, who wore her life like silk, even as they tried to strip it from her.
And above all, remember, she never apologised for existing, and then...
She just powdered her cheekbones and walked back into the room.